Hello, everyone. Welcome back. SandDAO Podcast number 50. We have officially reached 50 episodes of the SandDAO Podcast, and we've been at this about 5.5 months, 5 months. So that's a lot of episodes, and mostly because the content kept coming for the Sandbox DAO. And nothing has made me happier. There's been highs and lows. It's been a little bit of a rocky road, but only because the DAO is fresh. We're all learning, we're all iterating, and trying to mesh together to figure out what is this thing, this grand experiment that we have started down. The scope of today's talk is a reaction video. It's a reaction video with some commentary, and it's mostly a reaction video to the first episode that was published from Diggin in the Sand with Bobby Kunta, and it was awesome. It was so good. So I'm very happy, spoiler alert, with where it ended in terms of the transparency that it brought to the table, hence the reaction with the transparency, nice little green check mark in the thumbnail. So let's get to the disclaimer. I do not represent the Sandbox Game or the Sandbox DAO Foundation. I'm not your financial or legal advisor, and nothing I say is to be taken as financial or legal advice. When we say the word SIP, I'm talking about Sandbox Improvement Proposals. When I say DAO, I'm talking about Decentralized Autonomous Organization. When I say the word SandFam, I'm talking about the Sandbox community, those who participate in the people, product, and purpose of the ecosystem. That ecosystem looks a little bit like this, according to my opinion and how I put together the different sectors of the people, everyone from gamers to the Sandbox team, the product, everything from the game client to the DAO, and the purpose, not just the original white paper set off in 2020 about play, create, own, government, and earn, but also the things that are talked about by the co-founders Sebastian Bourget and Arthur Madrid, and also Yetsu, chairman of Animoca Brands, where they talk about the sandbox becoming the cultural capital of the metaverse and empowering creators. All that together equals a thriving and vibrant ecosystem that we all talk about in the sandbox. Today's episode is about the sandbox team and about the DAO, specifically about a podcast episode. For the scoreboard and checkbook, they haven't moved, mostly because the Sandbox DAO admin team is hard at work making sure that the delegation starts off without a hitch. I just finished interviewing 10 of the 12 delegates, so you can check all the previous episodes right up to episode podcast 50, where the remaining two, Mo and Roxy Miguel, will, as soon as I'm able to schedule with them, I'll finish those two delegate introductions. I am Lanzer, your podcast host for the SandDAO podcast, an unofficial podcast, not an official one. And I'm also president of MetaWorlds, where we have two experiences. One is Floor Droppers, which is currently in Alpha Season 4 at 00. And the second one is a Game Maker Fund 2023 called Lava Defense. How do we get here? Why is this podcast episode happening? May 28th, things were announced. The DAO was announced via Medium article. SIPs 1, 2, and 3 became available to vote. And then it kicked off a series of AMAs and SIPs that were voted on and ultimately passed. Many AMAs, many different town halls that happened along the way. And all culminating in the DAO admin team announcing the new communications manager, Kunta, on October 14th. And then November 17th, about a month later, the first Diggin in the Sand podcast episode was released. It was a dual, both discussion with Cyril, the DAO administrator, and also survey results. It was a bombshell of an episode. It was so good in terms of revealing and disclosing the inner workings of the Sandbox DAO. So the Sandbox DAO Official Podcast launched the same time as Bobby Kunta was brought on. And as you can see, those first couple videos were introducing Bobby Kunta. I've done a couple podcast episodes on that already, and You can check out, here we go. Episode 32 was my reaction to Bobby Kunta's appointment, and a very big, big sigh of relief, breath of fresh air. So that official podcast was launched at the same time, and some things that preceded this episode, his first episode, was some things I highlighted. The DAO Medium article that talked about progressive decentralization, SIPs, and the TSP DAO. It was launched here as a Medium article, and I did an extensive podcast on this one. And let's just say, up until this point, sentiment was not overly positive about the transparency, the perception of the Sandbox DAO and the transparency. And I did not mince my words at all when it came to this sort of stuff. I was sometimes a bit harsh, and my words reflected that. Overall, I mean, we came a long way from episode 1, talking to the community, different voices in the community, where we spoke to Hoddle Hill and Andy Ritchie and the Vision X and Crafter, some really, really well known, Pickaxe Master, really well known names in the SandFam
SIP.
community. And we talked about, what we thought about the Sandbox DAO. Most people were just confused. What was a DAO to begin with? What are we supposed to be doing in this DAO? How do we participate? And that persisted for quite a while, as we were trying to grapple with this new entity that most of us didn't even know what it was until May 28th. And so that was me right there, podcast number 1, back on June 16th. So about a couple weeks after the Sandbox DAO release, I started the podcast to try and make sense of what the DAO was and what we were supposed to do. And since then, we're now at 50 episodes on November 23rd, and transparency was tough to come by. And this podcast episode number 1 of the official podcast, did wonders, did so much in helping to bridge the gap that there was. And just to give you an idea of how much I did not mince my words, let's just set the stage for what is now. The circumstances were a bit different than back then, didn't have all the answers that I was looking for. And so here's what I thought, even up until recently. Yeah, so here's setting the stage. Reads, that said, we've heard the community's feedback and understand the concerns that the current council members are not necessarily from quote unquote SandFam, creators or players of the Sandbox game, but reflect more institutional players. And my note here was that in the beginning of the paragraph, it said, we've heard the community's feedback. And I wondered, where does the DAO admin team publish the feedback it acts upon? I haven't seen that. So, and the DAO admin team has received a lot of significant impact from the community, and it'll be really helpful to see some communication from the DAO admin team on what feedback gets implemented. So there's questions there from that article from October 7th of where is that feedback? The DAO admin team received a lot of feedback. There's a whole thing. You can watch episode 33, and I was a little bit harsh because at that point I was just frustrated. I was frustrated at what I wasn't feeling like questions were being answered and transparency being given. Then came episode 31, the birth of the Sandbox DAO, and that was a major excavation, let's call it, of what I thought was going on. I did all sorts of revealing maps and connections and things that that I was trying to figure out what was going on and was important to me and important to others. I won't speak for others, but from what I've been hearing of the other community, this was an important thing to figure out. Well, I'll play a couple clips from this episode and trying to figure out what is going on, what are the connections, who are the players, how do they relate to each other. Not everything has been answered at this point, but quite a bit has been answered. So the main part comes after doing the relationship map, uh, whether or not the judging of a conspiracy is happening. If you're Web3, and you probably know what I'm talking about, like the secret cabal, the Illuminati, all these things, and whether or not that was happening in the sandbox, because at the time we didn't really have much information about how um, how things were happening. So I had to figure it out myself, as did others, and a lot of frustration had been built in the meantime. So here's a section of that part of episode 31. You'd be forgiven. So if you looked at this situation, you'd be forgiven if you thought there's some weird, funky, suspicious things are going on. But on the balance of things, when I sat down and I started listing out what was the balance of judging whether or not a conspiracy is afoot here, I don't think so. I don't think that's what's happening. So even then, and this was not that long ago, October 21st, episode 34, even then, when I was weighing the balance of, is there a conspiracy going on? Is funky things happening? Or is this something that reasonable people would do? Even then I judged it weighed heavier that there are reasonable things happening. But what you couldn't ignore was the downsides and some of the things that we felt was not happening in line with transparency and the sort of things that we would expect of a DAO that is community centered. So the next part was um, explaining and the position of those who believe there was a conspiracy, whether or not there was, and I didn't believe there was, but it was right to give credit and the devil its due. So here's one of the top two things that I listed as to, on the balance of things, was something bad happening, fam, and things that I've heard the community say. Number one is there was no transparency in what happened. All right. The DAO just emerged out of nowhere. I didn't even know what a DAO was until May 28th, when it was suddenly announced through AMAs and articles, and it was just thrust upon everyone. All right. So there was no transparency. And even in the AMAs, there was. So we went over that there were some AMAs on the DAO, the road to the DAO, but even then it still wasn't clear what was happening, why people were involved, who they were, and it seemed, not just myself. I'm not the only one who said this. It seemed more like a press tour, and Cyril acknowledges this in episode 1, which is so many reasons why I love that episode. We're gonna go through it as a reaction, but just to set the stage, at the time, it seemed like a press tour, seemed like a big grand rollout to everyone except for the SandFam, the people who were voting and expected to participate. And Cyril explains this, and one of the many reasons why I love that episode. So that was one thing, that one big negative thing that was hanging since May 28th when the DAO was announced. And here's the second thing happened. Okay, the second thing is just as important as the first one, and arguably I hear more complaints and more people angry about this one than the first one, is that there was an excessive urgency to vote and rush everything into existence. All right, here's what I mean. So I go into the details of what that perspective is, and why people were so angry about that excessive urgency, where Cyril talks about that as well here in this coming podcast. So we're not going to get into those details. We'll just get into, you can go back to episode 31. The timestamp is a 1 hour and 4 minutes in. So that's kind of what we're talking about. The groundswell of confusion, anger, frustration. All of this was addressed in Digging in the Sand episode 1. And that's why this episode that you're listening to right now is called Transparency Has Come. A reaction to SandDAO podcast episode 1. So that would be this one right here. Let's get into that and all the wonderful things. I was just smiling as I could be listening to this podcast episode. So that was the stage setting into it. Me walking into that episode, all those things that I had podcasted on before, most of them were, most of the 50 episodes you're listening to right now, most of them are interviews with SIP authors. Most of them are news updates. Some of the later ones, starting about episode 30-ish, is when I start commenting on the rules and the lack of transparency, what I perceived to be lack of transparency. But here we are, Digging in the Sand, published November 17th. So really just 4 or 5 days ago? Yeah, 5 days ago. Bobby Kunta, the new communications manager, he does this Digging in the Sand episode 1 with Cyril and addresses the elephant in the room and tackles the tough issues head on. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Let's get into the reaction portion. You ready? Oh man, it's exciting.
All right, SandFam, what's up? We're going to jump right into the fun with this one. Welcome to episode 1 of the official Sandbox DAO podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Kunta. We'll be digging in the sand every week, so this is just the start. Let's address the elephant.
That's cool. Digging in the sand every week. Awesome.
NPC avatar in the room first. This is indeed a recorded, closed format episode. They certainly won't all be like this. I know folks want more direct access to the DAO's admin team, including myself, but we've got a lot of spicy topics to work through.
So when he first said that, like, this is a closed format, I really appreciated that he came out and said that. And truth be told, I was rolling my eyes like, oh no, not another press tour release. Please, Bobby, can we please address the tough issues? And then the next sentence he says, we got
all be like this.
It certainly won't all be like this.
I know folks want more direct access to the DAO's admin team, including myself, but we've got a lot of spicy topics to work through.
We have a lot of spicy topics to work through. And I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes. Bobby and I had spoken before, and we have had our own discussions between ourselves about what I really wanted to see and what was possible. And so we weren't strangers to each other, talking through tough topics. And now here he is, about to go into an episode where he's saying up front, this is going to be spicy. So we want it to be closed because we just, as he says,
and if for nothing else other than just the sake of time for this podcast, we just can't take more questions this week.
Okay. And at that point, I'm like, all right, let's give this a chance. Let's give this a chance.
That's mostly all we're going to be doing anyways, is addressing questions. So this episode's going to introduce myself a little bit, Cyril a little bit. We're going to review what the DAO's mission is. We're going to review also the real heart of this is the results from our recent community poll. We had 371 participants.
371 participants. That's a good data set. I would love to get my hands on that original data file so I can do things myself. But I was able to, because he showed things, I was able to start my own kind of data on that. That'll be for another episode. But this one is just strictly a reaction to the transparency portion of episode 1.
Some of them were people just trying to farm that sand reward there, but we'll get into that. We'll look at the raw results.
I love that he calls this out. I do. I really do.
Together. We'll also look at a summary of it. And we'll start addressing some questions fielded from the community. Surprisingly, we got quite a few of them. I think maybe people feel like they got their thoughts out in that poll because there was a lot of answers in there.
Boy, did they ever. If you go to this episode 1 and then you go to the results portion, you'll see he screen shares the actual results, and it is harsh. It is so harsh. And I appreciated that. I knew we were onto something big when he started showing that, in terms of Bobby being transparent and following through with what he said when he came through in the first episode, or his introduction video. And I said earlier that was episode 32, where I do a reaction to his announcement. And he said, I'm going to be more transparent. I'm going to bring out that stuff. I'm going to be building relationships and repairing in some cases.
There's some really thoughtful ones that we'll go over together. So future episodes of this podcast, before we even get to introducing ourselves, I want to let you guys even know what the heck this is all about. Why are we digging in the sand every week? It's not all going to be like us, Cyril and I, or just me running through recorded questions. We want to have more open format AMAs. We're going to have conversational co-hosted topics. These can be topics that you guys, the SandFam community, raise as things that you want to hear us discussing. We can have panel discussions. I know folks want to have more access to the advisory board, the special counsel, maybe bring in some of those folks on here so we can have the conversations that people want to hear. There's going to be more interviews with various ecosystem stakeholders, including those folks, maybe some of our new delegates, some ambassadors. We're just rolling out delegation. We're going to talk quick about the delegation and the new SIP submission guideline here today as well. It's a lot to get through, so we're just going to get right into it. This is going to be your official home for Sandbox DAO updates. We'll keep it all as succinct, informative, and transparent as possible. We are all in this together. This is a grand experiment of progressive decentralization. So if you're listening this far in, you're like 3 minutes into my rambling already. You
That's
probably
okay,
share the
Kunta.
common goal here.
That's okay. This rambling is setting an important stage, and already I can tell this episode is going to be different than what I've seen in the past. And I know the DAO admin team has been hard at work. I've submitted SIPs myself, so I know they've been engaging. There just wasn't that transparency that I was looking for to what in the world's going on. And this episode delivered on that. So what I'm going to be doing is this first portion here talks about introductions, and then later on, Kunta talks about the original vision with Cyril. Then they get into the SIP guidelines, which we're not going to go over this episode, nor are we going to go over the poll survey results that I'll probably do another episode on. But then we're going to fast forward to the conversation with Cyril and really stick to the transparency piece of this episode.
Of trying to build a long-term sustainable DAO that truly improves the sandbox game ecosystem for everybody. So now it's up to all of us to build that foundation of trust and communication. Soon we're going to be welcoming in broader membership, larger participation. So we're excited for the months and years ahead. This is just the start. So let's just jump back into this. Before we get to the community poll and the questions, I want to take a few minutes to chat with my friend, colleague, fellow DAO admin manager, Cyril.
Hey, Bobby. How's it going?
Hey.
Happy to be here. I've been looking for quite some time for this first episode, to be honest. So I'm very excited about us shooting this first episode together. I guess a few words about myself. So I'm Cyril. I've been working for the last 16, 17 years. I'm an engineer at heart in telecommunication and electronics in general. So nothing really destined me to working in DAO or most of the previous job I've got, to be honest.
And already you can tell, if you've seen the AMAs before, this is different. Cyril, in his previous podcasts with other podcast hosts outside of the Sandbox network, like NFC Lisbon and others that he podcasted with, you could tell that it seemed like he was more in advertising the DAO mode. He was talking about why the DAO came to be, but it was always from a perspective of like more of a public relations thing, not really something that a SandFam person needed to hear, not the inner workings for why is it here in SandFam now with these people. He didn't really go into that portion, more of progressive decentralization and kind of the buzzwords that you hear. But this episode right now, he's already talking about himself relative to the Sandbox ecosystem. And I'm already loving it. I'm already learning things about him. I knew he was an engineer, but kind of how it weaved together into his present day circumstances, you're already starting to see that happen right here.
I've done 10 years in banking. I worked for HSBC. I was a product manager, and then I had a product management team. So really building apps for the clients and the staff as well. And then I moved over to the insurance industry, so still in financial services. I worked for Allianz Partner for 4 years. I was an exec there, and I constructed and headed up their product team as well. Started dabbling in crypto as a hobby first, like 4 years ago.
Cool. That told me exactly what I needed to know. First off, how long have you been in crypto, Cyril? So 4 years. Okay. Cool.
And I've done some pro bono works for a collective of freelance called Fleet. And the Fleet Collective.
Oh, right. Fleet Collective. So in my in my episode 31, was it 31? That the birth of the Sandbox DAO. Yeah, 31. Yeah, birth of the Sandbox DAO. I did a relationship map, and it was here, and then I revealed this during the course of the episode, and I don't think I got all of it right. I asked the DAO admin team to help me out a little bit where I got it wrong. They weren't able to answer all the questions I needed in time for the episode. So I think I misrepresented or miscalculated the role that Fleet Collective had in it. I wasn't really sure, and I noted that I wasn't exactly sure their role. And so Cartan Group, I did know their role. I did find their connection to ApeCoin DAO. I'm pretty sure I got this portion right with the Maples Group and Travers Thorbalberga and ICSL and IPNA. I'm pretty sure I got them right, but I wasn't quite sure about Fleet Collective. So here he talks about how how he did work for Fleet Collective. I didn't know that actually, so I think I got that portion wrong. I look forward to updating it so that it is accurate in the future, and then then I can feel satisfied that I know who the players are and how they work together. Because in our world, the SIP author world and the business world of SandFam, we need to know who we're doing business with. We need to know how these players come together. Because when I write SIPs and I'm writing SIPs about revenue options, I have some of the top consulting firms in the world waiting for partnerships on these SIPs if they get approved. And there's a lot more that needs to know than just a DAO admin team. Like there's got to be more discovery there in order for a relationship to exist in the way that I need it to be successful for the SIP that I'm authoring. And I'm not the only one who's in that position where we need to know who we're doing business with. We need to KYC in reverse, KYB in reverse. And that's just necessary for some of these complex and impactful SIPs to be successful. And so that wasn't known. And I had to spend, 72 hours Google searching to figure it out. And I still got it wrong, but I was able to get at least some of it right. And so hearing Cyril here talk about his background and the connections that to that episode that I did, and it was very helpful for me to try and to take a step back to say, okay, I think I got some of it wrong. I want to fix it. And also, I can kind of unwind my own frustrations of having to figure this out myself instead of it being presented to me as, hey, here is what the DAO is made of.
What I've done for them is working on DAO and paying attention to the subject of progressive decentralization. Then what happened, I got fed up with my job and decided to...
I love that. He got fed up with his job. That's such good. This is a different Cyril. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just here he's conversing. He's just talking. He's discussing. He's being our DAO admin. He's not being the DAO admin to the external world, talking on a stage. He's our DAO admin right now. I can feel that. I can feel that he's talking to me. It's cool, man. It's so cool.
To start my own company, Arsakio, which is the admin of this DAO that we all love. And basically, I specialize...
And we do love this. I love this DAO.
Myself into building, designing, and then administering DAO from the ground up. So with that note, I've been brought into the Sandbox like a year and a half ago to start as a head of decentralization to start working on the principle
A year and a half ago. All right, so I guessed that one. I judged that one. Okay.
of what a DAO could be, right? So the DAO's been announced in end of May this year. It's already a couple of months old already. It feels like 2 years ago, but this is really a DAO.
And it almost it kind of was when you hear later on how early he was brought into this.
That is still in its infancy. And my role really in there is to interact with the Sandbox. I'm the liaison, if you want, with the Sandbox leadership team. I'm the liaison with the council. I'm also making sure the systems, are running and we've got, lights on and grease and everything is running well and everybody is equipped to do their job properly. So
that's not the first time he's explained what his job is, but it's the first time he's explained it in a way that spoke to a SandFam DAO voter and a DAO member. He's there to keep the lights on. He's there to make sure that machine is well oiled, that all the parts are functioning, the tech stack, the staff, to make sure that the ecosystem of the DAO is well run. And I'm going to be doing an ecosystem of the DAO episode in the future, talking about the inner mechanisms of how does the DAO go from step to step? How do all of the different SandFam ecosystem people interact? I'm so looking forward to that one. It's going to be, I'm going to love that. I'm going to love that. Looking forward to it. A few more episodes we have to do before I get to that, though.
really happy to be there and, having the chance to answer most of the community's concern to the best of my abilities with you today, Bobby.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit of your background there, Cyril. I know people are eager, interested to get to know who's working on the admin team here. So the more chances we get out in front of people, the better. So, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're interested in who I am, you're probably watching this on YouTube.
And we are. But Kunta already spoke to us as our communication manager in the introduction. And in episode, it was, I think I mentioned this one earlier too, in episode 32, right? In episode 32, I commended Kunta for how open he was from the get-go in his introductory video.
YouTube. The first video we posted is me introducing myself, so you can go get that whole 6-minute ramble there. But
Right.
for a recap, I'll let folks know. I've been building communities actively for about 30 years now, since 1995.
And if you'd like to hear his story and how he got to there, his DMs are open, and he communicates with. I mean, he's communication manager, but he really communicates, and you can always hear his background. And I won't spoil it except for what he's revealed, and it's really cool, very very cool.
It started throwing punk rock shows and raves under bridges and warehouses and in and around New York City, and really ever since then has been about bringing people together around some kind of common causes or feelings or products. And so worked in a lot of different industries across those decades, but been in gaming and crypto for the last 5 years. Was a Sandbox ambassador for 4 years, a land holder, sand staker as long as it's been available, and really bullish, obviously, on all things Web3, especially metaverse and gaming. I'm still like an old school gamer. I love the Nintendo NES, the Super NES. Even honestly, when we're talking games, even just playing chess, I share like some tabletop games, even stuff like that. So, a bit more old school, more retro, but I love seeing those things like this, like a pixelated metaverse come to life where there can be monetization and community building. And so I'm bullish on all things Sandbox. And I think that's pretty apparent from everything I've said about the Sandbox. So this is really cool to be here and sitting with Cyril, building the DAO together with the folks that are all out there listening to this. So you know where to find me. I'm happy to meet with community members one-to-one too. That's really what my role at the DAO
And
is.
he
We're
does.
all project managers of some kind. We have different areas of specialization, and we're working together towards these common goals. We kind of all have our hands in each of the things that the DAO admin team is doing to different degrees. My focus is the social media, community engagement, and all things communications, or just relationships with community and other stakeholders. So that's a bit about my background, what it is that I'm doing at the DAO. I think from here, what we want to discuss a bit is just what's the vision that the Sandbox originally had.
So here's that second portion. What's the original vision, and what is the mission of the DAO? So here we start getting into the meat of the transparency piece.
For the DAO, what the mission of the DAO is, and then what the mission of Diggin in the Sand podcast is going to be, just to kind of set the tone for the rest of this conversation, as well as just the rest of the series, and so people know what it is we're up to and why. Why don't you take it from there, Cyril?
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I really love what you say about retro gaming as well. It's a perfect segue with the Sandbox, right? The pixelated world. About the vision, right? Why the Sandbox done this really? Like, if you listen to what Seb has been saying, and I've been lucky enough to see him performing on stage, right?
I think he's referring to NSC Lisbon there.
The vision from the beginning at the Sandbox was to empower the community, right? It was usually.
So we talked about that in the ecosystem in the very beginning, how Seb has frequently talked about empower creators, and he wants the Sandbox to be the cultural capital of the metaverse.
User-generated content from the start. First of all, he started as, let's build a video game where we give people the tools so they can be their own version of the video game, right? So it was first of all a video game, then how we can transfer that through game makers or Vox Edit, that wasn't called that way at the time, how we can give people the power to actually create their own experiences and be the master of their own universe, because getting into the video game industry is super hard. Like, you really have to work your way up and be able to actually work in the passion project that you love. And we all love video games, right? But we know it's really hard to get into that. So I think the original vision for that was to, let's make it more accessible. Let's make sure everybody gets a chance at creating video games. So I really felt like the natural transition from that particular state was more empowerment to the community. And that's where I think the idea of the DAO came to fruition. By empowering community members to take participation into decision-making more and more, we're gradually transitioning from a regular company to something where now the community has a bit more say, right? Like, we've seen it with a couple of SIPs. We've seen it with this whole ambition of, putting this DAO forward. And really the DAO's mission now complement and it's the Sandbox mission by being an extension and the idea of the betterment of the metaverse ecosystem by including more and more the community in the decision-making process.
So here is where, now, granted, 5 days ago, I told you what the buildup was to all this, the frustration, the anger, the resentment that the community felt, that I felt. And so I'm listening to Cyril talk about how the community is going to be involved. And I'm sitting here thinking, have we been, though? We've been somewhat. But not to the extent that I would qualify that whole statement with what you just said. So this was me 6 days ago as I was listening to this and taking notes and preparing to do a reaction video. I already felt like he's talking to us. Like, I feel like this is the Cyril this is the real Cyril, the Cyril that is SandFam's DAO Administrator. And so I'm already kind of loosening up. And there I think, man, but can we do more of that, please? Instead of feeling like the Sandbox team is running the show, the Sandbox DAO team is running the DAO and not the voters. So that's what I was thinking at that exact moment, listening to this, and my vision, my perspective quickly gets turned around with the rest of this episode.
Yeah, excellent. I think the the formal mission of the DAO is let me see, I'm going to read this one. The Sandbox DAO exists to put the future of the metaverse in the hands of the Sandbox game community, fostering collaboration, creativity, and economic opportunity. So I think we're pulling it off pretty well so far. It's just a matter of keeping the people engaged.
And I agree. I think we are pulling it off really well so far. There's always room for improvement. You can always find nitpicky things to get at someone or throw a spear or whatever. But ultimately, yes, that is happening. And SandDAO Podcast 49 that we just finished with the SIP 12, the Sandbox Academy in the Philippines, they just educated 90 students on GameMaker and VoxEdit. That was a fully funded SIP to do 5 workshops in the Philippines to create an academy to teach students about the sandbox, the DAO, how to become GameMaker and Vox editors to succeed in the sandbox. He just finished educating 90 people and he's only halfway through the 4-day event. That right there is impact. That's the DAO helping the sandbox ecosystem. Well, okay, take a look at that. Go watch episode 49 with Mark Bago, who is the founder of Sandbox Academy. And now it's starting to go international with Saudi Arabia and India and Ecuador. Take a look. It's awesome.
On board here, and we're going to have more of a conversation about really what that means. So that's part of what the mission of the Diggin in the Sand podcast is now, to segue to that. We want to be able to bring the community, SandFam, the most accurate and up-to-date information regarding administrative and just operational happenings from the core team.
Administrative and operational happenings of the core team. And I think that's where SandDAO podcast and the official Sandbox DAO podcast might be able to differentiate themselves. We don't know yet. Kunta and I are still talking through it. What overlap should there be? What shouldn't there be? And it starts to look like he's more focused internal to the admin team and giving us updates, the transparency piece. And I'm more about the external, the talking to the SIP authors and talking to different community members. He's going to do the same thing. We're both going to talk to community members, but I'm going to be focused for more of an outside point of view, looking in. You can call it a fact checker, but it's not quite that intense anymore, I don't feel. If we keep going down this route where he is unleashing the transparency of the inner workings of the DAO, I have no doubt that I'm just going to be simply augmenting that from the external point of view, and we're all building together.
Addressing the most pressing community topics, the things that you guys are raising. This show, Diggin in the Sand, will serve as a place for informal conversation for the community at large.
And I already feel the informal part, and I really appreciate that, Kunta. I really appreciate how you brought that to life with Cyril here.
Eventually just bringing some folks up to have that open conversation on podcast. We're really doing this to advance that DAO's ultimate mission of just empowering the community to improve the greater sandbox ecosystem. So that's right there is a great
love it. So right here we get into the SIP guidelines updates. I do a whole episode on SIP guideline updates and the old process in May versus the new process that was just established in October. And again, that was a little bit of there was a little bit of frustration there in my voice, although I kept it as positive as I possibly could. And I think I achieved that portion where there's still a lot of questions as to how it's going to be implemented. But then again, in this episode, Cyril also addresses that. So when I do part 2 of this and I cover the kind of the mechanics of the SIP guideline updates that Cyril talks about and the pulse survey results, then then that'll be a complete circle. But for now, I'm going to skip to the conversation with Cyril and the part that unleashes the transparency that I've been looking for and that so many others have been looking for since May 28th when the DAO was announced. So it all begins 3221. All right, it continues in 3221. We've already learned a bit about Cyril, but here in 3221, they start talking about the decisions that were made up until this part. And just get ready. It is fabulous, superb.
All right, but I just wanted to say, in the way we selected
shared screen.
All right, but I just wanted to say, in the way we selected those questions, as you would realize, we didn't select the questions that we wanted. We really selected the question that we saw.
And the questions they're talking about are the questions they posed in the type form, the survey. And the questions were like, I don't recall all the questions right now. Actually, we can just see here. What interests you in participating in the DAO? How would you describe yourself? What kind of role do you feel best suits you? And then they had like an open question of different results of what do you think? In your own words, what are your chief concerns about the DAO? In your own words, what most interests you about participating in the DAO? How do you see the long-term success of the DAO? And as he goes through this, as he's going through this, you can just see the blunt answers people are giving. I don't feel heard. Who is this? I don't feel like the advisory council, or the special council, or the advisory board is representing the community. I don't feel heard. There's lack of transparency. Are we really decentralized? Like all of these, they go through, and now they're going to talk about with Cyril the what the perspective was of the DAO admin team, which is what was missing this whole time. We did not know what the DAO team believed. We saw music, we saw articles, we saw PR, public relations, marketing buzzwords. But we didn't hear from our DAO admin team about what was happening. This solved that. And it solved it well. So, in my opinion, it solved it well. So let's get into that.
All right, Bobby. Yeah, I just wanted to say, in the way we selected those questions, as you would realize, we didn't select the questions that we wanted. We really selected the question that we saw were the comments. were the most prominent in all the feedback we've got. So some of these are hard questions, to be honest, and we don't shy away from them. So I just wanted to point this out, right, that we did not sugarcoat it and really selected the easy ones. We really selected the one.
And it was obvious at this point in time that that's exactly what happened. They selected the hard questions, and they went over those hard questions during the results portion of this video. I skipped over that. I'll do a separate podcast on that because I have my own thoughts that I wanted to expand separate from transparency.
One that we thought was the most important for the community based on numbers alone.
Yep, that's it. And so what we distilled this down to is ultimately the bullet pointed list that you see on your screen here. People don't feel heard. Special counsel and advisory board selection and what their roles exactly are, how they're compensated, those are in question. There's a perceived lack of transparency. People feeling rushed, like especially the first few SIPs were rushed. There's this progressive decentralization that's taking place. We want to refer people to that Medium article, but we've got to discuss what that really means. What the grand experiment of rolling out a DAO slowly over years really looks like. And some of it we're not sure. We're making this up as we go. Like we're learning from other case studies and we're doing the best thing.
Oh, I can't believe you just said that. That's so cool. We're making this up as we go. And they're not literally just making up everything as they go. They are planning. The DAO admin team is planning and putting a thoughtful approach into this. So it's not just like willy-nilly, let's just see what happens. They are being responsible and planning. So as a fellow program manager myself, I can appreciate that.
Possible to advance things as we can using the best strategy. So the transparency and decision making, that's sharing those decisions with you in the best way possible. Striking a balance between that transparency and efficiency is also just a question. Like when and how that has to happen. We can't, it doesn't even make sense to tell everybody everything, but even in Cyril's weekly reports, you have a behind the scene screenshot.
That was so cool. When he started doing those weekly reports, bi-weekly reports now, he was sharing the SIP queue. He shared his actions that he was on, his workload. That was awesome. And I was really appreciative of him doing that. He started that, I think, a couple months ago. He didn't do it every week. He didn't do it all bi-weekly. Sometimes he took some weeks off. So that was my one source of real transparency was that. And it helped, but it didn't answer the question. What was going on? What were they? What was their thought process? How did they get to there? What are their intentions? Because there was a lot of mistrust. At least for me, I didn't trust the DAO admin team. From what I saw, it was frustrating for me, and I was trying to stay as positive as possible because I love the sandbox, I love the DAO, and I wanted to trust the DAO admin team, but I felt like that trust kept on getting eaten away over time with the lack of transparency. But this restored that by the end of this episode.
Shot of what our notion looks like, what we're discussing on our Slack channel. So we're as transparent as we can be here. Staking,
I would love access to the Notion channel, by the way, if we're allowed to have that publicly releasable. I just did a podcast episode with the Bankless DAO, now called Black Flag DAO. They have a Notion website that is so here's what it looks like. They have a public transition plan for their DAO, and it is awesome. Where is this thing? There's a transition council. Where is this? They've got themselves integrated master schedule showing all the stuff that they intend to carry out in order to transition in their DAO from one branding to another. And this is cool, man. If Sandbox has something like this, please consider releasing it. It would solve most of my problems. It would solve most of my concerns. And a lot of them are solved already just by this episode. As long as we keep doing it, then we'll have achieved everything I need to know to be a functioning member and really just focus on SIPs and building and podcasting news updates instead of podcasting confusion.
Discussing what that really means, how people can use their staked sand, and what the future of staking is for the DAO, what that means. The DAO operating in a gray area landscape. So unpacking just what people think by those kinds of comments.
So we're talking regulation. We're talking the uncertainty of regulatory agencies and their view on crypto. And if you Google search, you'll find all sorts of stuff about that. Not just the United States government, but many other governments and their stance toward crypto, and by extension, DAOs and blockchain entities. So the DAO admin team is carefully been considering the risks and implications of that. So as I found out through this podcast and other comments in the forums, that's a concern, and they want to ensure that they are stepping carefully through what is the reality of how the world views crypto and blockchain. And I get that. I can understand that. I just want more transparency. I just want more. And and this podcast episode did a long ways to get there.
Questioning the DAO's operations. Again, like Cyril had, like Cyril said, we're not shying away from these challenging topics. So hopefully that's appreciated by the SandFam out.
It is. Kunta and Cyril and the rest of the DAO admin team. I'm not going to dox your names. I know that they've been talked about before openly, but for the rest of the DAO admin team, Cyril, Kunta, this is appreciated so much. Oh my gosh, so much is this appreciated.
There. The language barrier problem is very real. We've got to address it. Low participation.
And we discovered that when we did the DAO delegate interviews just this past week. We had one from Korea, one from China, one from Indonesia. The language barrier is a thing. SandDAO Podcast 50 or 47, I think, with Hervé. He has a delegate that wants to focus on bridging the divide between East and West, and that language barrier is something that Hervé talked about quite a bit. So these things are being addressed, and they're being worked on by the SandFam community, and it's one of the reasons why one of the things we're trying to tackle as a SandFam.
Participation rates, not just in the forum, but SIP submissions and what that looks like. The idea that everybody just wants money. We didn't just raise that concern. The community raised that concern.
And that's been a DAO. Any DAO you go to, you're probably to hear that. I'm part of 9 DAOs at this point. I'm active in about 4 or 5 of them, and that's not just a SandFam or a Sandbox DAO thing.
Of themselves, which is a great, self-actualization. So addressing that head on, the ability for an author to revise their SIP and take feedback into account. So just the SIP submission process and clarifying that for maximum efficiency with the community. So these are some of the things that we want to take the time to unpack here. Just in the next, we're not even going to get to them on this episode. I want to say that we're going to have to come back and do something like this again, and maybe just
good. Thank you for recognizing that, and I'm really glad you didn't rush the episode.
Cyril and I record another conversation here sometime in the near future, just talking about these things so that you guys can hear our thought process, how it's coming out of our minds on this end. And that might be a part of the future steps towards the transparency that people.
It absolutely is. And I'm so grateful that y'all are willing to take those steps. You, Cyril, and the rest of the team.
Want. All right. So with that in mind, let's just, give a minute to each of these. People not feeling heard.
Yeah. So I guess.
People not feeling heard. I think he said the word hurt, but people not feeling heard. That was the question and the short list that he showed toward the end of the results.
That's one of the reasons, I guess, you joined the team, Bobby.
Yes.
To be that liaison and acknowledge the fact that when we started this whole endeavor, to be honest, I'm not a professional, community manager.
Also, it's kind of cool the way he pronounces liaison. I think it's a French word to begin with. So to hear a French speaker, which Cyril is a French speaker, to speak the word that, as an American, I grew up saying, liaison, and here he is, liaison. That was cool. I just little stuff like that. It's cool.
and I don't necessarily know how to address the community properly or do that kind of thing. So maybe that's where this perception came from in the first place. Like we don't know how to reach out to you guys, because I've never been like facing a community of the thousands and being able to answer to everything they say. I'm more like a silent builder type, but that's just me. And I know the rest of the team is probably of the same character.
All right. Here was, if you could judge like the pillars of this episode and what revealed transparency, this is the case in point right here. I don't want to dismiss or downplay anything he just said. What he just said, that sentence, I'm going to play it again. All right? I want you to understand just how important it was that he said this.
Yeah, so I guess that's one of the reasons I guess you joined the team, Bobby, to be that liaison and acknowledge the fact that when we started this whole endeavor, to be honest, I'm not a professional, community manager, and I don't necessarily know how to address the community properly or do that kind of thing. So maybe that's where this perception came from in the first place. Like we don't know how to reach out to you guys, because I've never been like facing a community of the thousands and being able to answer to everything they say. I'm more like a silent builder type.
Cyril, I wish you had said this at the beginning. If you had said this at the beginning, I would not have been near as intense in my questions on the forums. I would not have been near as intense in some of my podcast episodes and my remarks. Dude, this makes complete sense. Okay? I didn't know any of this. None of us knew any of this. That you were the silent builder type, that you didn't know how to address the community, that you're not a professional community manager, so why would we expect you to be? Like that is the transparency that I'm talking about when I say transparency. That the approach, the rationale, the mindset, the mind of our DAO administrator. This is what turned it around for me. And that, if you look at the forums, I make an apology to the DAO admin team. And I'm going to find that, because I apologize to the DAO admin team after watching this episode in full. But this was the primary reason why I did it. This 20-second repeat that I just did. And let me find it. So Cyril made his bi-weekly post not long ago. No, here it is. So this post right here, 5 days ago, he talks about how the delegation's live, talks about the first podcast is live, and been trying to tackle some difficult community questions and lacks some time to discuss all of them in the end. That's fine. That's no problem. New episode will follow soon. Awesome. So I look at that. I watch that episode, and then I feel all that's left after watching the end of this episode is what was left was me wanting to apologize. And so I did that because I have been intense. On the forums, I asked questions up the wazoo. I questioned everything because I felt that there was not the answer that I felt that a DAO community should know. And so I started off, in my response back to Cyril was 9 days left to gather VP before SIPs resume. That 9 days now will happen next Wednesday on the 27th. So I like, yay, that's awesome. And then Cyril also revealed that only 2 submissions were received for the UGC website request for proposal. If you think you can build a UGC website, the DAO admin team wants to hear from you. So please take a look at that. And that was really valuable, knowing that there's 2. And let me tell you why. I'm a builder. I'm also a business person. So I'm not the best at developing a UGC website, but I can hire a team that is. I know how to put together a team and program manage my way through it. But I'm not going to do that if other people who are better at UGC websites than I am put their name in the mix. I'm a program manager. I can program manage my way through it. And with a request for proposal, I can build the necessary team. But I'm not going to do that if there are people who are good at that already submitting. So 2 people is a low number. And they want more diversity in the submissions. So I've been considering submitting for it. I just haven't had the time because of all these episodes I did in the past 7 days to interview the delegates. So the deadline has been extended by a month. I think that means by the end of this month, because I believe the deadline was at the beginning of this November. All right, so anyways, Cyril asked in his episode, tell me how the episode went because it's impossible for me to watch myself. This is Cyril's words. I'm just quoting it. And this is where I went into, it worked out, and this is me quoting myself here. My response to him was, it worked out really well. This episode shared a lot of great things that helped me understand where your thoughts were. It was really good to hear your background at length and see those raw results from the survey. And at 3553 timestamp, when you talked about being the silent builder type, and you talked about how you aren't a professional community manager, and you don't know how to address the community properly, and how you wanted to launch the DAO in an awesome way at NFC Lisbon after 8 months of thoughtful planning, my friend, that's the kind of thing I wanted to hear and understand from the beginning. What you said makes complete sense. And when I heard you say it, I felt my anger, mistrust, and resentment start to fade away. And what I was left with was wanting to apologize to you for how intense I've been toward you and the DAO admin team. So I'm apologizing now. Dear Cyril and the admin team, je suis désolé. I am so sorry I did not give you more trust and the benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry I rushed to conclusions about your motives. And I'm sorry I didn't try harder to understand your point of view. Si t'es pali, pardonnez-moi, pardonnez-moi. I'm so sorry I butchered that French. I hope you can forgive me. I want to repair what can be repaired, build with you, and work toward a positive future. So that was my apology post back to Cyril after he asked to tell me how it is. It's impossible for me to watch myself. I completely understand that, by the way. I really dislike hearing myself. But yeah. I came away from this feeling like I needed to apologize because I heard the transparency I was looking for when Cyril talked about how he wasn't a professional at community management. That's real. That's being my DAO admin manager in the Sandbox DAO. I can live with that. That makes sense. Not everyone can be everything. And so Cyril responded, don't worry about it. It's okay. I know you want what's best for the DAO and you don't trust easy. I understand. I'm the same. And kudos on the effort with the French. I'm sorry I butchered it. Now let's build some cool stuff together. Boom. Boom. So I felt like that flipped a switch in me, hearing him expand upon how he's a silent builder type. He didn't know how to do this job. And that's why Bobby came on. And Bobby is crushing it. And so where Bobby talked about they each have their specialization. Cyril's been thoughtfully planning the DAO. And we're about to get into his thoughts on that. And that was the second pillar of this episode that really addressed the transparency gap that I've been searching for this whole time. And how intense my questions have been because I didn't have that sort of stuff. I didn't know where they're coming from. I didn't trust his motives. Why was he here? How was it that he's been working on it all this time and we did not know? So he addresses that head on. So let's continue. Thank you, Cyril. Thank you for being real and vulnerable about that. That went a long way with me, and I feel it will with the rest of the community.
But that's just me, and I know the rest of the team is probably of the same character. So yeah, one of the things we did is brought a talented person like yourself, Bobby, to try to be that liaison and somebody that is used to addressing a community, that knows how to conduct themselves in a community landscape. So that's what we did, and we're hoping with this podcast, with the forum, to be more and more accessible to the community while still trying to do our job in the background. Because
and I can tell you that as I see this more transparency, I'm going to back off a lot more on being so intense because I'm going to feel the trust. I know I have faith that the DAO admin team is working toward that end goal, that same end goal that I'm trying to work toward, and that nothing else squirrely is going on. And now we have a communications manager who's able to bridge that gap and help provide that rationale. Now we're cooking with fire. We're firing on all cylinders.
There's a lot to be done in the background, so we can't spend all day on the Twitter, on the forum, on whatever, doing those things, right? So that's our...
And I understand that. I get it. They can't spend all day answering all my questions. They can't spend all day on Twitter. They have a job to do. They're trying to figure out how to run a DAO and plan for the progressive decentralization over the next 5 years.
Intent on bridging those gaps.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Well, I'm excited to be here, and that was one of the first things I recognized as well. So, continuing that spirit of transparency with everybody who's still listening like a half hour into this podcast.
And we are. I'm still listening. I like this long form stuff. I know not everyone does, but this is what matters when it comes to running the DAO. It's relationship, it's trust, it's faith and action and delivering on product. And in order for this ecosystem to be vibrant with business people, with gamers, with designers, with speculators, with traders, brokers, you need to know who you're doing business with. I need to know who this DAO admin team is so that I myself, because I have more than just a podcast. I've got a life, I've got other interests, business interests, I have a full-time job, and there are certain rules and expectations that I have to abide by, and part of it is knowing who I do business with outside of my job, my full-time job. So these things matter, and it's unlocking my potential. I feel like this episode is unlocking my potential to be more than just suspicious, confused, and all these things being barriers to what I want to do, which is build. I want to build organizations and structures and make it easier for SandFam and SIP authors to do what they do best. And some of my SIPs reflect that. I want to be spending my time on the SIPs. I want to be spending my time educating on transparency and showing and making it easier for people to interact. Not like an internal thing where Cyril's team is doing, but make it to where kind of what Kunta is doing, but on the other side, on the community side, bridging the gap between communities, bridging the gap between voters. That interdelegate panel that now we're probably going to do with the delegates that we figured out that they want to do too. That's the sort of stuff I want to do. I want to build relationships and between the community, where Kunta's main job is to build relationships between the DAO admin team, the sandbox, and the community. I want to be building relationships within the community, making that firing on all cylinders, making that efficient and effective, where we have things where we can communicate between ourselves so that when we do interact, we know what we're doing because we have a responsibility as well to ensure that we are good community members. And I want to contribute to that mission. Cyril's contributing to the mission of making sure that DAO is run well and the tech stack is functioning. Kunta is contributing to the mission of ensuring that the transparency and that the DAO is being messaged properly and that they're fulfilling their obligations for communication to the community. I want to be in the community. Whereas my last number of podcast episodes before I interviewed the DAO delegates, I had to focus my attention on the DAO because there was so little that was known about it. So I had got to the point where I had to do episode 31 because I couldn't wait any longer for the DAO admin team to tell me how it was being run. It is what it is, and I did that episode. The frustration shone through there, and the anger and the resentment and the mistrust, and this episode turned that around. This episode that we're watching right now with the Diggin in the Sand.
Yes, when I first joined the team, I said, here's the first at least 3 months of my mission is going to just be repairing relationships and opening communication channels, making sure that we're.
And you have been doing great, Kunta. Please keep going. Please.
We're on the same page with the community that we're working with. And so.
Exactly. Working for and working with. I think that's the right mindset. It's both.
Yep. That's it. I mean, before.
Not just one or the other. It's not you're working for the community. You're working with it, and we're working with you.
Before we even try and grow the DAO, we need to have this solid foundation where we're on the same page with everybody out there.
That's mainly why this podcast came to be. If you go back to episode 1, why I started it 2 or 3 weeks after, it's because there were so few answers. I had to try. I had to figure it out with the community. We didn't even know what a DAO was, most of us. And when you watch the first 2 episodes, you're just going to see that mass confusion. What is this thing? I'm Google searching the DAO, as I'm doing podcast episodes to try and figure it out. And this podcast has largely happened because of that confusion and that lack of transparency that we thought at the time. So if Bobby had been here from the start, I don't think SandDAO Podcast would be what it is. I don't think it would have started the same way. I don't think it would have had the same episodes. I think it would have been a lot different. And that's not a dig. That's not anything bad against the DAO admin team. Like Cyril said, he did what he did in order to get the biggest impacts first, the things that were most important to the DAO's survival. And unfortunately, communicating with the individual members wasn't as high on the list as making sure the tech stack functioned, as making sure delegations were unleashed, as making sure that the SIP process was being iterated on. And I get it. I get it. When he explains it, I get it. I just wish he would have explained it earlier. Just earlier. That's all. That's the only criticism I have of this podcast episode is if it had been done on May 29th instead of 5 days ago, November 17th, I don't think there would be near the backlash. And Cyril's about to get into that.
And everybody across the globe, no matter what language they're speaking, whether they're for or against any particular SIP or whatever. So that's what we're working on right now. Everybody who's listening to this, I invite you to be a part of it. Like, well, let's work to construct, to build. Let's work positively towards building something awesome. So the perceived lack of transparency, that feeling rushed, it's related to people not feeling heard. It's that same element, but the rushed first few SIPs. Can you remark on that?
Yeah. These are good points, and I've heard this quite a few times, to be honest. So it's painful to me when I hear this because I've been working for like many months, before the DAO can be released. So saying that I've rushed it or we rushed it is a bit harsh, but I get it. I get where this is coming from.
And I'm appreciative that you acknowledge that you get where we're coming from. And now it's time for me to eat some humble pie as I listen to Cyril talk about the thought that went into this many months ahead of time and how it wasn't just a secret cabal of people pulling the strings behind the scenes. I don't think so. I don't think that's what's happening. And I think Cyril really reassures and explains the path to how we got to here. And it makes sense. It's very reasonable.
From it is on the first few SIPs and the way that they were pushed very quickly with, frankly, what has been a poor communication. So
thank you for acknowledging that. It leaves me room to where all I have to do left is apologize because I was intense. I was intense about that perceived lack of communication and the rush SIPs, just like the rest of the community was. And so some of those community members were much harsher than I was, like just straight up insulting. And I didn't want to devolve into that. I wanted to keep pushing forward. And I'm glad that Cyril and Kunta, they're meeting us. They're meeting us where we are. And we can repair, rebuild, and then just keep building.
I mean, designing this whole foundation, the rules for voting, the rules for proposing a SIP, what's the website to support all of that took time. And I don't believe that was rushed. That was the fruit of many, weeks and months of, looking at other DAOs and how we can make the best one possible based on what the others have been doing and what's our vision for this one.
And I appreciate that he said that. I think that was good to hear. I needed to hear that he didn't believe it was rushed and that he put a lot of thought and time into it. And as we actually learned with just podcast 48, I believe, with Hervé, he also played a part in the formation of the DAO. He said that he helped write one of the first drafts of the Sandbox DAO when he was brought on to help consult a little bit with his company. This was, I think, before even Cyril got involved. So I didn't even know that Hervé and his company was involved before Cyril was. And so that was fascinating. So it makes sense that when it was mentioned in the white paper in 2020, that it wasn't just a mention. There was considerable thought put into figuring out how are we going to roll this DAO out that we put in the white paper. So to hear Cyril say that it hurt to hear us call his work rushed and corrupt and all these different words that were used by different community members. I understand. I can understand why he would feel hurt by that. And like I said, man, I'm sorry that I was so intense about that. I'm sorry.
But what was rushed is probably the way we've announced it.
Yep. And in episode 31, I cover that. If you look earlier in this episode, SandDAO Podcast 50, where I went into episode 31 with the balance of the cabal and all that sort of thing. If you go back to there, I talk about the timeline that felt so rushed. I go through the timeline of it was announced on May 28th. Three SIPs were immediately thrust on us. 2 more SIPs like a week later. So 5 SIPs within a month we had to vote on, and we didn't even know what a DAO was. So that kind of rushing of the announcement and the all right, here's a SIP, now go vote, even though we don't know what a SIP is and we don't know what a DAO is. And so that's the rushing of the announcement that he's talking about. But that second pillar is about to come into play of how and why they went about it that way. And I get it.
And the way the first few SIPs got brought to people's attention, because we wanted to start somewhere. And I don't feel we could have designed. I mean, I've been working on many mini projects. Like as soon as you get more than 5 people in the room, it becomes impossible to get an agreement on anything when you design a product, right? Whether it's a website or an app or anything, right? So it's easier to go fast when you're a small team. So can you imagine designing a project with like 1,000 members? That's not possible, right?
I disagree just a little bit, but I don't discount what he's saying. It is harder to get to a consensus or an agreement with thousands of people. I run a couple product teams of about 15 to 20 people each as a program manager, and I have an extended team of about 25 more. So anywhere from, I don't know, 35 to 50 extended team members, so functionals, advisors. And it's hard to, when I bring them in regardless, and I make my meetings open to them, and so that they can come in, it's like a revolving door, and it makes it harder, it makes it tougher. But in the end, it makes it more complete. And we aren't surprised very often. And we get consensus pretty easy nowadays. So I only disagree in the sense that I see what he's saying. I don't discount what he's saying. I think it's true. It doesn't have to be done that way. And for what it's worth, he chose that way because that's what he felt that he wanted to do. And he is given the authority to be the DAO administrator, not me, not Lanzer. Lanzer's a community member. This is the DAO administrator who is doing this full time. So I can appreciate that that's the decision he came to.
Right. So there's an idea that was that we need a small team to put down the foundation, no pun intended, of all of this principle, and then propose them to the broad community. But still, the way that we've announced it, we were in Lisbon. We say it was a whole coordinated event in our mind, right? It was like, we're going to announce it on stage. Seb is going to go on stage at the same time he goes on stage. The website it goes live on production. The 3 SIPs are pushed on Snapchat, and there's like a tweet or 2 mentioning this, and an article I think on Medium. In our mind, that was like awesome marketing, rollout plan. But then we quickly realized that it didn't give the community enough time to reflect on this DAO and learn what it is, why it exists, what's its objective. And they were already being asked to vote on stuff, select a council, approve a constitution, do all kinds of stuff, right? And I felt like they should have got.
There it is. Summarized right there. Episode 31, summarized right there. I completely agree and support that interpretation, Cyril. So let's hear that one more time, because that to me is the second major pillar in this video. So the first was, look at the note, right? So the first was, I'm not a professional community manager. And the second was,
Of all of.
and then that's why Bobby was hired. Oh, it was, we didn't know how to address the community, right? So that's real. Okay, so learning Cyril's road to the DAO, right? So we learned about Cyril and his road to the DAO in the beginning. And then we heard Cyril admit and be vulnerable that he's not a professional community manager and he didn't know how to address the community properly. Okay? Makes sense. I can't do everything either. And I mess up all the time. I'm a silent builder type. And we heard him say he's an engineer background too. So yeah. All right. And then later on he says, let's go through what he says again.
Instead, looking at foundation, those rush, we can make the best one possible based on what the others have been doing and what's our vision for this one. But what was rushed is probably the way we've announced it and the way the first few SIPs got brought to people's attention, because we wanted to start somewhere. And I don't feel we could have designed. I mean, I've been working on many mini projects. Like as soon as you get more than 5 people in the room, it becomes impossible to get an agreement on anything when you design a product, right? Whether it's a website or an app or anything, right? So it's easier to go fast when you're a small team. So can you imagine designing a project with like 1,000 members? That's not possible, right? So there's an idea that we need a small team to put down the foundation, no pun intended, of all of these principles, and then propose them to the broad community. But still, the way that we've announced it, we were in Lisbon, we say it was a whole coordinated event in our mind, right? It was like, we're going to announce it on stage, Seb is going to go on stage. At the same time he goes on stage, the website, it goes live on production, the 3 SIPs are pushed on snapshots, and there's like a tweet or two mentioning this, and an article, I think, on Medium. In our mind, that was like awesome marketing, rollout plan. But then we quickly realized that it didn't give the community enough time to reflect on this DAO and learn what it is, why it exists, what's its objective, and they were already being asked to vote on stuff, select the council.
Yep.
Approve a constitution, do
all this thing happened at once, May 28th. And all this stuff we were requested to do and fulfill as a responsibility of being a SandFam voter in the DAO. And we didn't know the heck that was, man. Didn't even know what it was. You just articulated, Cyril, the frustration. And I get why you did it the other way. The big grand opening. It makes total sense, man. If I was in your shoes, I might have even done the same thing. Yeah, that makes total sense. The grand opening, the big ribbon cutting ceremony, to where you have the press, and then with the press comes the attention, and then new DAO members and new SandFam members and new gamers in the SandFam ecosystem, and just blowing up because yet again, SandFam, Sandbox is making the news, and we're doing big things, and people want to be a part of those big things. I get it. I totally get it. Whereas had he not done that, had he, pieced it meal along the way, when that final ribbon cutting ceremony might have happened at NFC Lisbon, then it might have just been just a little pop where people say, oh yeah, we knew about that a long time ago. And so it wouldn't be as big a deal. Well, I get it. I get why he decided to do it that way. And thank you for explaining this. This is what I wanted to hear from the beginning. But I get also why he didn't do that in the beginning, and why he didn't explain it. Because he's not a professional community manager, and he didn't know how to address the community. And it took them some time to realize that this is how we were reacting, and not like it comes out in the open and we're like, oh, yay, Grant, thank you so much for this. This is awesome. And that's not how the community responded in SandFam at all. So him acknowledging this, second pillar, and knocking away any mistrust and resentment that I had, just eating it up so that it doesn't exist anymore.
Kinds of stuff, right? And I felt like they should have been involved early on. But like I said, we have to start somewhere. So there was this weird balance of, efficiency, we need to start somewhere, how to involve the community. But now in retrospect, I definitely feel like we could have done a better job at communicating this, explaining this, teasing this maybe in advance before announcing everything at the same time. That's for sure.
Cool. And to me,
I believe that's where the rush sentiment comes from.
That is exactly where the rush sentiment comes from, Cyril. That is exactly where you put your finger on it. And to me, after you've acknowledged it this way, after you've talked about your rationale for why you went the opposite direction, the big grand event approach, and everything all at once, now that you've acknowledged it, you've acknowledged why you didn't communicate up until this point in the way that you have, and that the AMAs felt like a press tour, and because they were, and the NFC Lisbon was a press tour because it was by design to make that big bang, that big splash in the DAO ecosystem. Now that you've said all these things, I consider the matter closed. I may not agree. I don't have to, because you're the DAO administrator. You have the authority to do this. I consider the matter closed on my end. I can't guarantee I won't bring it up again in the future, but what I can guarantee is that I don't look at it with mistrust and anger and frustration anymore. Let's build together. I understand. So it's time to start looking forward and not looking backward. We're not going that way anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I even felt like it. Like the votes on the first few SIPs, they took place before I even really had a chance to wrap my head around what was going on.
Yep.
And I think that's also just a product of our all being in Web3. I mean, like, how many Discords want us to stay active every day? Oh man, it's like there's just so many communities and places to pop into and stay hip to. Like, what is my other token doing? Do I got to restake this? Do I got to? I mean, there's a lot to stay. I mean, I've got calendar items reminding me of the craziest things. So yeah,
I couldn't agree more, Kunta. I couldn't agree more. Even on top of that, I mean, how fair is it really to for the community to expect of itself? You know, that so many different things are going on in Web3, and I get it. Even if we had known, like, what was the expectation there really? I completely agree.
I mean, I didn't even get to vote. You know, I didn't know what they were. Another remark I wanted to make on that is, you know, I've been having one-to-one conversations. I invite the community, you know, reach out to me in the DMs on
One of them was with me.
the Sandbox DAO socials, or personally, if you know me, some of you do, you know, talking about this stuff. And people have said to me, like, why didn't the DAO just start with the community writing the Constitution
I will self-ID and say I was one of those people saying that.
together? And I said, you know, like, that is one, you know, that's a possible way to roll out a DAO. It would be really hard to do though, because like every line would have to be debated. You know, so
Yeah.
That's fair. And you hear that episode 48, 47, the DAO lessons with Bankless DAO, how difficult it was and how challenging it is for a transition team to restructure a DAO, to rebrand, to decide what the DAO wants to be now that it has divested itself from Bankless DAO to now Black Flag DAO, and it's trying to reimagine itself. And the transition council had to be elected in order to be more efficient with the path forward, from everyone wanting to input on everything now to a smaller team given the authority to decide and figure it out. And having been elected, there we go. The only difference between them and us in this regard is that we didn't elect the DAO admin team. We didn't elect the transition council. The DAO admin team was appointed, and the special council members were nominated. We couldn't nominate them ourselves. They weren't from the community. Well, that's not the right thing to say. That they weren't as involved in the community as other community members who wanted to nominate themselves, like me. I want to be on the special council, and that or the advisory board, but mainly I'm going to be going for the special council. So, yeah, that frustration. But I agree. It would have been really, really hard to do, Kunta. I completely agree. And at some point, you would have to have a decision maker to say, all right, we've taken in the input, here's what the output, and that's the way we're moving. We will iterate on that success, which is basically what they're describing in this podcast episode.
You know, there's no right or wrong way to do this. This is the way it was done. We have to acknowledge some of the mistakes, learn from them, grow from them. If you don't know the word Kaizen, go look it up. It's a spirit that I know Cyril maintains from product development.
Kaizen is just, iterative, continuous improvement.
Carry over as well as constant little bit of improvement every day, always thinking about how to make it better. And that's what we're doing. That's what we need the community for as well. So
and that feedback loop, right, is equally important. Like the small iteration and start small, then build upon it, but also integrate that feedback loop is I believe, important, and constant, improvement, integrating your own ideas and feedback from your customer, even though we don't have customer, but like people that use your product really.
That's ultimately what it is, right? We're creating a product of sorts. So I mean, these are the kinds of analogies that we're.
And that's why I put it in the product section of the ecosystem. Right here, under products, the DAO, because it is a technical solution to the need, the dilemma of community. How does the community resolve its differences? How does the community act on its vision? How does it implement its goals? You use the tech stack of the DAO, the discourse to communicate, the snapshot to vote, the wallets to spend, the elections to appoint. It's a product.
We're drawing on our side, hopefully through future podcasts like this, people who are interested in the DAO can understand our lines of reasoning, the way that we're thinking over time. Your thoughts, your suggestions.
You have no idea how hugely helpful it was to hear the lines of reasoning. I get why some people may believe that it wasn't important to understand the reasoning, but it solved the dilemma for me on multiple fronts, not just as a SandFam gamer, but also a business person running a business. and trying to align business interests within my own team and my own partnerships to try and bring those partnerships into the sandbox. The sandbox is gaming, right? It's got different products. The Sandbox DAO is where gaming, community, business, and leadership all intersect. And I'll be covering this in the ecosystem and the DAO podcast episode that I'm so looking forward to doing in the future. But that is the intersection of those things, which is why I'm so invested in this, which is why I love being here in the DAO, because I love every single one of those things. I just got off a podcast a couple days ago, NFT Now. They just interviewed me for an article, and yeah, I talked about, and I also did a podcast on Forbes Web3. I also did a podcast on Tech Talk, and I've sounded like a walking advertisement for Sandbox sometimes, and I have to kind of check myself to be like, all right, I need to make my disclosures. I need to make sure that I comment on not the bad, but the improvements, so I don't sound like I'm just an untrustworthy billboard of getting undisclosed payments, which I'm not, by the way. I'm not getting paid for this at all to do any of this, and yeah, I sound like a walking advertisement for Sandbox sometimes, and it's important to know that my reputation is on the line, just like other people's are, when it comes to convincing business partners, some of which are some of the top consulting firms in the world, that I've met and networked with over the years. And some of these SIPs requires me to be successful with them, and I cannot hope to bring them into this if I have confusion or uncertainty about the business environment that I'm asking them to partner with. I've got to know. They've got to know. There's too much brand reputation at stake to not know. And so this is helping with that.
Questions, your feedback, your comments are all integrated, assimilated into the way that we're thinking. We're taking these feedbacks from polls like this one that we did, future polls, and we're doing this together. We're all on the same team here. I think that's the real spirit to be taken out of this. Even if some of us get rushed through a certain point, it's like taking a big hike together. Like some of us are more tired on parts of the trails than others, and we've just got to like keep each other moving.
Some SandFam have been SandFam since 2018, 2020. They're already tired, and then they get this DAO rushed on them, and they're like, what? Come on, man. And so they, they're pissed. They are mad. And you heard that on both the podcast, the Sandbox Discord, the Sandbox DAO forums. It was so obvious. Some of them were not kind in their perspective.
Along. So that's the real spirit that I want to inject into this, is that like we are the Sand Fam. All of us, whether you're working for one of the brands that's building in the sandbox, whether you're the gamer who's out there, whether you're somebody who's just milking 50 sands off the polls that we're posting, all of them are part of our community. And so
I love that he gives those people their due, even though, I don't think they should be doing that. And it kind of hurts us, the fact that we acknowledge that, yeah, they're doing it. They're here, they're present, they exist, and not ignoring them. I think that's cool. That's the right move to make.
and that's the real
Acknowledging existence without endorsing or accepting that they should be doing that.
spirit. I mean, I feel tingles when I just say that kind of stuff out loud because it's exciting, man. We're building something awesome together. And
You and I agree on that. It's exciting. I feel the same sort of tingles, especially, and I felt that when Cyril talked through his perspective. I felt that same little tingle to be like, oh man, this is cool. This is exciting because it unlocks potential. It unlocks people's involvement and kind of fades away with their fear. Or their fear, it fades away, and mistrust. At least mine does.
And that's what we want to share here the most. So we're going to move on through some of these other bullet points here in the discussion with you. Okay, so really we want to take a minute to get back even into progressive decentralization. We could give it another 2 minutes or so here. And I mean, we've got 9 bullets to get through and hopefully not too much longer. Been at this 45 minutes, but all of these deserve more unpacking, and we'll get
I've been at this 2 hours.
This is just us beginning to address these with everybody. So, I mean, let's go back to progressive decentralization for a minute. Now, we refer to the article in Medium. Can you speak to this for a second more?
Yeah, of course. I guess I invite everybody to read the article that's been posted quite some time ago. We shed some lights on what we meant.
And that was the Medium article that I did a podcast episode on. It was episode number 33. Take a look at episode number 33. And again, that's from the perspective of someone who did not hear this episode. I didn't hear this episode until now when it just got published 5 days ago. This article was published on October 7th, so I was a little bit harsh. And you can see all those questions I had and intensity that I brought because I needed to figure out things that weren't obvious to me or anyone else that I asked. And they're like, hey, what does this mean? That I don't know. We're all just sitting around the campfire going, I have no idea.
Meant by progressive decentralization, but at the core of our strategy was to do a bit of handholding with the community, right? We've seen many DAOs failed. I mean, the DAO was a very first catastrophic, unfortunately, example. And what we wanted to do is to allocate trust on a progressive basis and making sure only certain proposals that we know are really aligned with the sandbox value get to pass, or having a strong curation process that I know sometimes can be frustrating. I know that, but it's here to help eventually the community, right? That is not necessarily professional in evaluating what's a good proposal versus what's a bad proposal. That more often than not, the author are professional, but not everybody's a professional at project management or software delivery or whatever it could be, right? So I know sometimes it can be frustrating, but that's really what we're trying to do here with this whole curation process, is to making sure the proposals that have been vetted, that have been decomposed as being possibly understood by the majority. This is what we're trying to achieve. I'm gonna give quite a quick anecdote. 2 weeks ago,
By the way, Cyril, if you're watching this, I love your anecdotes. I think when you started doing those anecdotes in your forum responses to me the past month, you did a couple quick examples and quick stories. That really helped me start to peer into who you are and some of those really, really fascinating things that helped me piece together what was happening. That's really where the unwinding of my mistrust started, was when you started giving stories and anecdotes of situations that you had faced, and some of them were very applicable to the DAO. And I'm like, oh, no, that I get that. So the fact that you keep doing these anecdotes, I think, helps me understand better you and your decision making.
French company that is doing potato chips ran a poll on Twitter about what should be their next flavor, right? That could be a DAO experiment as well. What we should be doing about XYZ.
Sure could.
And more than 2.5 million people voted, right? So it was a huge success. But the flavor that got voted the most was gasoline.
That's true. That is one thing you have to watch out for, as taking in too much of the community input, is the flavor that got voted the most was gasoline. Nope. Can't do that.
So the potato chips company had to do a very awkward clawback. Oh no, actually we didn't meant that. Really, it was just for fun. And
see, that's where I disagree with companies nowadays doing that sort of thing. The play isn't to be like, oh no, we didn't really mean it. No, you meant it when you published it. You got a response you weren't expecting. So what instead I think, my personal opinion when it comes to transparency, is acknowledge that, yeah, we did post this. However, we got a response we weren't expecting, and we clearly cannot offer gasoline flavored potato chips. And you just say that. Then the rest of the world is going to be like, yeah, we know. No one's going to seriously be like, no, you should definitely do gasoline potato chips. No, that's not a realistic option. So I take Cyril's point, and where he's going with this analogy is, taken too far, community involvement can be a negative thing, can be a detriment. I agree. Taken too far, it can. That's why we have a DAO administrator with the authority to make a decision. Because at a certain point, the feedback has been given, the inputs have been taken from the community. It's time to make a decision and move forward. And then we do the same thing next time. We process, we iterate. Community.
And there was the intern who decided to make that poll, and it was not really their intention. So you see how this stuff could derail. Another experiment was in 2016. The Royal Navy in the UK went out and published a poll about naming their next
I remember
boat.
this.
And the name was Boaty
McBoatface.
Again, as a joke.
Boaty McBoatface. The Royal Navy wanted to name a ship. They posted a poll out, and the poll this made the news. This made international news. And the answer that was most voted on was Boaty McBoatface. Now, that one's a little bit less serious than gasoline on potato chips, but it is part of the Royal Navy's military image. So did they name their big vessel, I think it was a destroyer or cruiser, a Boaty McBoatface? No, they didn't. But they did handle it pretty well, and Cyril talks about this.
But and they had to make sense out of it. So I think they decided to name a skip that was inside the boat, like a smaller one. They actually named it that way, and they keep the whole boat with the more serious name. So I guess my point.
Yeah. So what they did was they named it I don't know, the HMS something normal military, but they named one of the smaller vessels inside the ship Bodie McBoatface. So they still found a way to honor the intent, the spirit of what was asked. But they didn't feel like it was reasonable to name the entire vessel, a military vessel made for war, Bodie McBoatface. So that's just funny. Like, how do you deal with the reality of the situation? Not what you wanted to happen, not what should have happened, but what did happen. You put out a poll for potato chips and ask people what they want. The people say they want gasoline. Clearly, you're not going to give them gasoline potato chips, okay? So, what do? What I don't think you should do is like, oh, no, we were just kidding. You weren't kidding. You weren't kidding when you asked the question. But now that you got an answer that you have to make sense out of, that doesn't make sense to you, acknowledge that it happened, okay? Don't backtrack, because then you don't look like you're in a good place. But the military, the British Royal Navy, saying, yeah, we're not going to name it HMS whatever, but HMS Bodie McBoatface, a ship that's firing salvos at the enemy. But we're going to name one of our smaller vessels that, something a little bit less serious, maybe. Yeah, that is acknowledging the reality, what did happen, not what should have or could have happened.
Point is, those stuff can derail pretty fast, and trolls are a universal constant, I would say, in this world.
Sure.
And that's maybe what we're trying to do with the progressive decentralization, like trying to do a bit of hand holding. And this is a transition, and we will, as the community, show and we the good proposal, and we and trust them more and more, we relinquished some of that control. That's
So here's where, yeah, let's go back a couple seconds.
always been our, I would say, in this world. And that's maybe what we're trying to do with the progressive decentralization, like trying to do a bit of hand holding. And this is a transition.
It seemed like they weren't really doing progressive decentralization. It seemed like there was more centralization happening, especially now that we went from anyone can submit a SIP to the DAO team to now the DAO team has to invite you to do that. So that seemed like a reversal of decentralization after the DAO was launched. So it didn't seem like things were trending in the right direction. It seemed like there was more power being held by the DAO admin team. And so this hand-holding seemed like it was too much hand-holding. And because we looked at the DAO article and it just didn't make sense of it, it was too many questions. It was too against what we were expecting. That's where the mistrust and the anger grew more and more and more until this episode where he explains his rationale and intent.
And we will, as the community, show and we the good proposal, and we and trust them more and more, we will relinquish some of that control. That's
and right there I went on the word some. So he said some of the control, but interesting thing to me is that I've been keeping track of what Seb has been saying about decentralization, and he's mentioned no less than 3 or 4 times on different podcasts, and the latest one was with Mia Bao, was that he intends, Seb, his vision is that the SandFam community takes over part of product development, part of running the Sandbox company. And he even said more recently than that, I can't recall which podcast it was at this point, but he even said more recently than that outright that he hopes that in 5 years, in some number of years, that the community, the DAO, is running the Sandbox Game company. Now, whether or not that's a founder's dream and goal versus the realistic plan of what will happen, this remains to be seen. But Seb has been very clear about that goal multiple times, even from the early AMAs. So I believe him that that's what he wants to happen. Whether or not that can happen, we'll see. And let's see. I know I had the one with Mia Bao here where they did the AMA, and I did an AMA reaction to it where I talked about that. It was, if you want to hear that specifically, we interviewed Mia Bao, and it was so August 23rd when Mia hosts a broadcast with Seb on Twitter, and he said it was about 2/3 of the way through.
Agency, they will be building dungeon game, vampire survival game, and we're already talking with a lot of other studios. So progressively, you're going to see proven gameplay from mobile, from PC, where you can start enjoying Sandbox beyond our game maker.
Okay, it was there. It was at 17 minutes is where it was.
Instead of always coming to the sandbox and ultimately to me in a very vertical structure where like some of the team members will ask finally for an approval, we will encourage them to know to do like it's amazing what you want to do, but ultimately it shouldn't be us as Sandbox to decide what's best for the platform. It should be the community itself, and you should use their voting power through the sand and the land to decide if they think like
That's the
you're
DAO.
suggesting that what you propose is going to drive an impact. What kind of impact can it drive? Like, can it bring more users, more creators, more awareness? Can it help the product to become better by deciding on features of the roadmap, by supporting the development of custom tools that make the life of the creator easier? That was one of the SIP before. To drive initiative like participating at conference around the world like DEF CON that's coming, or Token 2049 in a matter of a few weeks. How much reward should be distributed during the various season and events and so on. Ultimately, all of those decisions that we're making internally as a Sandbox team will be progressively allocated and handed over to the community to decide.
That's the DAO. So Seb has said that no less than 4 or 5 times openly, and I believe him. I believe that that's what he wants to do. We'll see. I don't want to hold him to that specific goal because that's a pretty intense thing. That's a pretty bold thing to say. That, and I believe he said that on my podcast too. It was SandDAO Podcast 8, I believe, was my interview with Seb, where handing over the entire product team to a DAO, that's a bold goal. I am cautiously optimistic about that. So we'll see. But in any case, that Seb has not been unclear about that. He's been very clear. So where Cyril just said some of the control, I wondered at that word. Is that like a scaling back of Seb's original intent? Or is it just it's going to be some over time and then more full? That'd be like my follow-on question for all this, but it's not something to kick up a ton of dust over right now, like I would have if I had not heard the rest of this episode. If I just heard that part, I'd be like, all right, I'd still be intense about, well, why did you just say some? When Seb, your boss, maybe? I don't even know what the relationship is, but Seb, the founder, says, I want to give it to the DAO. And here you are, the DAO admin, who's supposed to work for the community and with us, saying that we're going to give some over. Like, who are you to say that? But if now that I've taken in the whole episode and I've seen this, I think I didn't need to blow up like that. This is a conversation. It's an iteration. We're building together. So while they are interested, Cyril just said he's interested in making sure we do this progressively, that we give more and more trust and control. Okay, let's start with that, and then we can talk about the spectrum of whether or not it should be some or more or full or what.
It's always been our intent with this, right?
That was really good. Those are some great remarks. I hope people appreciate the meaning behind there, drawing that parallel, because it's really easy for everything to go awry with what could even be a seemingly innocent joke. And we're talking about building the future of a gaming ecosystem, right? It's like like building that $1 billion warship or something. It's right. Into the SIP process a little bit as well. You know, like the challenges with the complexity of sometimes this curation process, and you know,
this one impacts me specifically because I have submitted, I think, 6 SIPs. Pretty sure I've submitted 6. I've put 10. Let's see, where am I? There we are. So I put 10 on the Sandbox Ideas forum. So Windows resizing, roadmap of releases, in-game inventory filter, DAO revenue option study, the SandDEX, the SandDAO podcast, Builders Challenge Working Group, Sandbox Governance Working Group, reduce DAO voting quorum requirement, establishing Sandbox wallet voting criteria. I put those 10 on the SIP ideas forum. I've submitted 6 of them to the process before it changed last month. So I've been grandfathered into continuing that to vote. So this impacts me big time. And all of these were sourced from some sort of problem statement in the community that was left unresolved. The Windows resizing and in-game filter was things that we've been asking for years in the Sandbox community. Roadmap of releases is just trying to figure out what in the world is coming to us on these products, because most of these studios, when we try to build an experience, we have to build to not only what is now, but also what is happening in the future. I just built floor droppers in Builders Challenge 1, which was February this year, okay? By May, it was already obsolete and things were breaking. And so that, and if you noticed in the beginning of floor droppers, when it was released with Alpha Season 4, there were bugs. That was because the new release of Game Maker broke some of the mechanics that were working perfectly the day before. And it was so frustrating to have to try and fix that. So knowing the roadmap of releases of what is going to come out in these products is hugely helpful to a business person and to a studio like myself and MetaWorlds. As it is with Touche, as it is with SandRush, so many of us have commented on that SIP as wanting it. We need it. If you want us to make good business decisions, we need to know what is coming down the pike for capability and tooling. And I'm going to be going over that episode, the Sandbox ecosystem and the business of game making, as a separate podcast in the future. DAO revenue option study. This was a lesson learned from Ep-001. It is running out of money, and it's running out of money fast. And instead of colliding with time and not doing anything until the end, I want to fix that thing now. I have some very professional, very well-educated and expert teams that I have partnerships waiting to be turned on with them. We're talking top consulting firms in the world to help us identify streams of revenue that we can put into place now so that we start to accrue revenue and be self-sufficient as a DAO. So that one day, if the Sandbox team isn't able to give us that 15.5 million sand every year, then we're still self-sufficient. We can still decide for ourselves what we want to do with our budget because we still have money coming in. And this is going to be stuff that's organic, things that we don't have to do, like contrived things, like selling, I don't know, having a bake sale or selling parts of the IP. Like none of that. We're talking things that are organic and inherent to Web3 and the Sandbox community. Things that's not going to take away from us, but will add to. I built a team that's ready to do that. It's just going through the review of the DAO Admin Team to get to vote. SandDAO podcast is this one, to expand it so that I can have people do things that I'm not very good at, and so I can churn out better podcasts faster and better quality. Reach more audience. Builders Challenge Working Group, Sandbox Governance Working Group. That's because of the Sandbox Special Counsel and Advisory Board not being really in the community very much right now. So ApeCoin DAO has working groups, as do other DAOs, and they seem to work. Elected people who help manage more day-to-day stuff for the community. And yeah, SandDEX I thought was a great idea at the time, but it's basically like a phone book of major landowners, because quorum used to be a huge issue. Almost half of the SIPs that have been gone to vote have failed because of quorum. And so the SandDEX was one way to go about combating that. Might not be needed now that delegates is out. With 24 million voting power combined with all 12. 2 voting million power each. And then reducing DAO voting quorum, that one got a lot of positive feedback from the community. May not be needed anymore because of the delegates and the voting power they now have separately. But I got a lot of feedback on reducing it at least by 25%, maybe even half. But maybe we don't need to anymore. We'll see. We'll see how the delegate system works. And then last but not least would be Sandbox voting wallet criteria, which was all about establishing different criteria for when the Sandbox could use its 27 million voting power, because sometimes it used it and sometimes it didn't, and it wasn't obvious why it used it. And it wasn't clear, especially when Seb said early on that they were going to resist using it. But they have been using it in some cases. So I wanted to establish criteria to make that a thing. But that might no longer be needed with the Sandbox. Well, remains to be seen if the 24 million voting power given to the delegates came from that 27 million wallet. If it did, we probably don't need to anymore. Probably, but we'll see. 27 minus 24, still 3 million voting power. That's quite a bit. Yeah. What that might turn into, though, now that I'm thinking about that right now, is that the Sandbox wallet becomes a voice of itself, and it's on par with the other 12 delegates. That is brilliant. Oh my gosh, if that was the plan all along, that's brilliant. Because then it's reasonable for the Sandbox wallet, which is the company, to be its own voice, its own mini delegation, almost, its own delegate. So instead of 12 delegates, we have 13. That 13 delegate is the Sandbox company advocating for itself. I have no problem with them voting however they want to after that, because it makes sense. You have the different delegates that have parity. Then you have the game company has a little bit more than the other delegates, which is fine. It's the company. It owns the product, and it can vote its own choice. Makes sense. The company has a voice too. It is part of the ecosystem. Right there. See? Sandbox team, I consider part of the ecosystem. Cool.
So, I mean, can you remark a little bit further on that? So,
I think we touched a bit on that when we mentioned SIP's guidelines previously, but basically our idea is the objective is twofold: to have like the highest possible quality in terms of the proposal and in the way they're written, not judging the content itself, but in the way they're presented to the community, right? We want to have stuff that can be understood by most, that has all of the right boxes being checked, being, for example, budget, timeline, milestone, what you're trying to achieve, why the Sandbox should be doing this, basically to match out the most important things in the proposal itself. So making sure these are thoroughly, completed and made available to the public. As for the process itself, it is not perfect. This is not like perfect. This is not perfect process. This is still discovering on the best way to do that, right? Like today, I would qualify.
I'm so glad you said that. It wasn't obvious to me that was their perspective when they sent the DAO Medium article declaring the new way. It felt like a declaration, like you will do it this way, and some of it felt like a jab at the community, maybe even me. At least that's how I took it. I don't think that's how the DAO team meant it. And hearing this, I definitely don't think that the DAO team meant it like that. So, but it wasn't clear that this is an iterative process. It came out heavy-handed, like thou shalt do it this way because we know what's best. And that's why I was so intense with my response in my podcast on that one.
Our processes.
I think that was episode 33.
Being 2 steps. The first one is community ideas. Like everybody that has a great idea gets to start a thread on our forum and get to see people reacting to this. But then the question is, how do you select those ideas and turn them into SIP candidates? Because not every idea deserve to be curated, because otherwise we'll need to hire like a team of 100 people if we were to.
This is where I might differ with Cyril. I think that the DAO operations budget should be used to bring on more people, to have a bigger pipeline for SIPs, so that those SIPs can be considered. I think people should be able to submit for recognition, for vote, and not be gated through an invite system. I think that's just a disagreement or a difference in opinion between Cyril and myself. I respect that he has the right and the authority to do what he's doing. And after he explained himself like this, and I understand his rationale, I don't have a problem anymore. I don't feel so intense about it. We will figure it out together. We will build this together. This is a process. And I don't feel like they're declaring that we are right, we know what's going on, you don't, which is what the article felt like. That's what the DAO admin article felt like.
curate every single idea. So there's no hard science behind this. Like, how do we select the best proposal? It's a combination of community interest, some judgments made by human beings that are not machine, that have their own judgment as well. There's no like automated process from idea to like SIP Curation to vote.
This would be another mini pillar that I would note, is him saying that, look, we're human, right? That we are humans. We are not machines. I feel like that's a plea of acknowledgement that look, we're just trying to figure this out, like you all are, like SandFam. The DAO Admin Team is not like this end all be all omnipresent, omniscient thing. We're just trying to figure it out too, and I respect that. It alleviates my anger at feeling like the DAO Admin Team thinks that it knows everything, and that it knows SandFam, when some of the DAO Admin Team have not been SandFam that long. So how could they possibly know what SandFam believes? Some of us do. Some of us have a good pulse on the community. Kunta, I think, has a good pulse. I think he took a break for a little while as an ambassador, but it feels like he has a good pulse in the community. Does Cyril have a good pulse? I didn't think so. I didn't think that the DAO Admin Team had a good pulse, that they really understood what SandFam was all about. And that was why I was so intense and frustrated. But what I hear Cyril saying is, please give me some time to figure this out. We're just people trying to figure it out like you. Okay. That makes sense. I feel my mistrust start to fade away as I'm listening to this.
Manual is done by human beings, right? So how do we go about that? Maybe it's not perfect, but we're trying our best to like monitor the forum, look at the ideas, assess what we think is good, assess what we think has great momentum, and then we start a conversation with the author of this proposal. And throughout this conversation, that goes by having new guidelines being published. It used to be a template now, and they had that pros and cons, and now we moved to a type form.
Pros and cons.
A situation.
And the type form has pros and cons too. I noted that in my thread back to the DAO Admin Team, some recommendations where the form has a pretty intense con about the way you can communicate your plan, and some things didn't align with the number of milestones you had to have with the tier that you were submitting for. So just little things like that, but ultimately it feels like a step in the right direction. Although I just don't know how it's going to play out over time.
Where you answer some questions and it filled a database directly for us, so it's more streamlined on our side, and we believe it guides even more the author. And
yeah, it's more streamlined on your side, but it doesn't exactly feel more streamlined on our side, because it went from having about 5 steps to 8 steps in order to do this new process. So it did make things a little bit more complicated for us in the way that it was described in the article and then on the forum post. So I'm not convinced yet, but I give you all the benefit of the doubt now. And let's just see how it works out. Maybe it really is better, and it just looks like it's more complicated. But having where I have to submit a SIP idea and then wait for an invitation, which I have no idea if or when it's going to come or what you're basing it on, it's more confusion is what that one was. But after hearing the rationale, let's give it a try. I'll be less intense about it.
Hopefully, reduce frustrations along the way as well.
You talking about it right now is reducing my frustration, and I think it will reduce many other frustrations.
Excellent. This is really all such great information for people in the community who are interested about how this is all happening, what's going on, like quote unquote behind the scenes. I know you've done a lot to reveal that through the weekly updates and the screenshots of.
And again, I love that you've been doing that, Cyril. I think it's been awesome that you've been showing that. It's helped me out as a SIP author, a business person, a community member. It's helped me on many fronts. And then you explaining your rationale here is really the final piece of the puzzle set together.
Our Notion.
Just please keep doing it.
Page and there's
as much as your schedule allows.
Slack channels, even just to show everybody what's going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a great segue to the next bullet point here is just transparency in decision making, and this is a great start to things. Just letting people meet the DAO team more personally.
Yes, it is.
See behind your thoughts. What's driving and motivating us, and this is great. So tell me more how we can be transparent in decision making. Right now, what are we doing already? What can we do better? And I also wanted to remark, if you're listening to this, drop a comment, or if you've got open channels with us, tell us. When we ask these questions of each other, you're part of the fam. Tell us what's up.
Yeah, for sure. I think we touched on this a little bit at the beginning. This is like really great territory. There's no perfect way to go about, putting a DAO together and then administering a DAO, right? So we're making a conscious effort, that's for sure, to be as transparent as possible. I don't know
I feel like you are now. It didn't feel like that up until this episode and Bobby Kunta came into the mix. Like you said earlier, you are really focused on doing the big stuff first, and the transparency, unfortunately, took a back seat in many ways. It has been getting better, and now I say it's much better.
We have the transparency page, for
So I want to give you kudos and props for doing that. Thank you.
example, on the dashboard, on the website itself. It's called the dashboard, and everybody gets to see how much money's been spent. There's been some challenge with this page, by the way, technical challenges, but that's a conversation.
Yeah, we did notice. I tend to use Snapshot now because the technical difficulties and challenges on the proposal website on the DAO, it doesn't load properly all the time, and then sometimes it misreports the percentage of the yes no vote.
For another day, but basically when the community goes in there, you've got all of the wallets that are associated to each of the budget, and you get to see the expenses that are made. We do have another dashboard that is more internal, when you get to see forecasts, like when your SIP gets accepted, payment gets relinquished upon milestones completion. So I'm tracking like how much we already paid, and that's visible to the community, just accessing the transparency page on the dashboard.
It's not transparent which wallets, which SIPs are getting paid out, because all it shows is, well, I'll show you. All it shows is the wallets. And you can't really tell which wallet is being paid out to what. I mean, you might be able to figure out based on the category that the SIP was in, which SIP it is. So for instance, the staking SIP, you can probably tell that the staking SIP is this one, right? I think. But I don't know. All I can do is click Polyscan and look at the wallet and see the transactions go to different anonymous addresses. I have no idea what that is, how to read this. So the operations budget we know now is strictly for the DAO admin team. It wasn't always known that that's what it was for. Like there once upon a time where you could submit a SIP under operations. I didn't know it was only claimed by the DAO admin team until like a month ago when Cyril mentioned it in a forum post in response to one of my Q&As. The intense Q&As. Thanks again, by the way, Cyril. But you could submit for all of these. And so it wasn't clear, they still show, in many ways, I think they show incorrectly how much is left. So I'm not exactly sure how this is helping me, except that I can kind of tell maybe what SIPs fall in which buckets. Maybe. I haven't been able to figure it out yet. So I've been relying on my own sheet. It's what I call the DAO checkbook here. I've been doing it myself. Which budget is it coming out of? And yeah. So like this one, there are game content has 4 SIPs that are in it. So does Sand Initiatives. So it's hard to figure that one out. But I like that you're trying and you're trying to create a technical solution there. I can see the wallets, which is awesome. The wallets are hugely important to know because that's like the final page in quality assurance where I can check to see the numbers myself. I just now need to know who are they being paid to, and I don't know. Maybe I don't need to know that, but it's helpful to know how it's being paid out. At least one of us needs to track it. You or us.
But there's also the forecast one. And we're thinking about how to make
Right.
that also visible to the community.
Please make the forecast one visible, because I have had to create this thing. This is a forecast mostly. As soon as the SIP gets approved, I record the expense, and it tells me how much of the budget. How much the budget is, how much has been spent per SIP, and how much of the budget remains. But what I don't know is how much is being spent along the way, because it's a fluid tracking that I don't have the time right now to do, so I don't have a solution in place. Maybe if my SIP passes, though. If my SIP passes for SandDAO Podcast, I might have the time to do it. And at least have a teammate that can do it and expand that.
Community. It's all on our Notion. And it's all, a bit of manual work plus, a bit of here and there. And how to make that visible to the community, I think would be great as well. So you've got SIPs completion, you've got how many milestones been achieved, and you got how many.
Yeah, Notions are available on other DAOs. I would like to see this Notion, Sandbox DAO's Notion. I think it would make a lot of transparency issues go away.
How much money has been transferred to the other, and how much will be transferred to the other upon successful completion of the milestone.
That would be awesome.
Projections in the bills, that we're regularly paying. All of that kind of stuff that we're just working towards sharing as much as we can but not everything can be done overnight. So this is a process, and it takes time and it takes resources to get there.
Okay.
I have the weekly, semi-weekly, not so weekly operational updates.
Yeah, see, I like that he recognizes that he wasn't posting it every week like he originally said. Then he went to bi-weekly, but then he wasn't posting every bi-weekly either. But I like that he acknowledges it, and it's okay. If you acknowledge it, all right, I get it. You've got a workload, so do I.
I'm trying to do every Monday. I guess I haven't done these in a while. I've been busy with delegations, but this is also an opportunity where I take screen grab of our Notion page and try to share some thoughts about what has been our priority recently and what are we doing. This is also another example of trying to be more transparent as well with the community. And now with you, Bobby, I guess people will get a more direct connection and the ability to interact more frequently with.
And it's been great seeing those Notion screenshots. That was a big step forward, and it helped. It started to help unwind my frustrations about transparency, to where leading today, to where most of them are gone now after watching this episode. And as long as Kunta and Cyril are still doing these sorts of things, then most of my concerns about transparency are gone. There's a few left, but the vast majority of them are gone.
With us, like you mentioned at the beginning, in a couple of episodes, it will become more of a live conversation. So I'm also looking forward to that. So
Me too. And I'm glad, now I am kind of glad you did a closed format to where I could see this, because it changed. If I had been live while this was happening, I think I would have asked, not an insulting question, but I would have asked a pointed question. I would have asked, where is the transparency? What can we do to ensure that it's given? But here you are explaining it. And all I had to do was watch a podcast episode to figure it out.
also an effort to be more transparent. I'm not sure there's many DAOs that do it this way, but this is what we're trying to do.
Some do. Some do it way more. Some do it way less. But yeah, many do transparency. Like I said, I'm a part of 9 DAOs officially. I'm a membership of, but I'm really active in like 4 or 5.
in this DAO.
Right. So hopefully people dig all of this, to get to meet us. I think the more people even hear our conversations and how we're coming at this, the more that, and it's such an important word, the more that trust can be built, because
Yes, Kunta hits it on the head. The more that trust can be built, rebuilt, relationships repaired. Yes, I did not trust the DAO admin team. I did not. I felt like they lost my trust early on, and I hadn't yet to see it be rebuilt. And I'm sorry that I was so quick to judge that. And I apologize to the DAO admin team via that forum post that I showed a little bit earlier. And yeah, I think Kunta hit it. Trust.
That's I think a big part of what's missing right now is there are people that are questioning what's going on
I agree. And I was one of them.
because they're not seeing the process, they don't understand it, and they're not sure what even are the intentions of the DAO admin team.
When he says that, I'll just self-ID. He's talking about me. I'm the one that said, I don't trust the intentions. I'm not seeing what I need to see to believe that the DAO admin team is really on our side, on SandFam's side. I wasn't seeing what I expected to see in order to make that obvious to me. And so I questioned the intentions of the DAO admin team. And Kunta listened and took that in, and I can see now he really did. He really did understand and take that in. He really is repairing relationships. He's crushing it, man. Absolutely crushing it. And I appreciate how he handled it. I appreciate that he did handle it, and he is now handling it continuously, not just with me, but with other SandFam. Because I'm not the community. I am part of the community. I don't speak for the community. I speak for myself. I'm just journaling out in the open. And a lot of people come and they do send me messages about stuff. So I do get to hear different community members talk about their perspectives. I don't speak for them. All I can do is just advocate when they're not here. That's all I can do. And speak on behalf of myself, my own opinion.
Team are so to make all of this clear in the context of our shared mission together, this is really valuable. So we got so much to get together.
Very valuable.
We're trying to keep this under an hour, but it's not looking good, y'all. So the special counsel and advisory board selection and their roles and how they're compensated. I mean, can speak to that for a moment. And again, a reminder to everybody, we're going to try and unpack all of this deeper, maybe in just like little short clip episodes of Cyril and I talking about things more, so you guys can get our thoughts. But talk to me, Cyril.
Starting with special counsel. back to the sentiment about the first few SIPs being rushed, like we had to start somewhere, and it was always our intention not to do an election process about special counsel because we wanted this DAO to start with the special counsel so we can start processing SIPs as quickly as possible. It was an intentional decision. Maybe it was a design flaw, maybe it was a mistake, but it was definitely intentional. And because we wanted to start somewhere and we start quick back to.
So at 56:15, he talks about special counsel and advisory board being appointed was an intentional decision. And then he adds, maybe it was a design flaw, which I think is self-actualization. It might not have been a real design flaw in real life, but the fact that he's willing to consider it, that Cyril is willing to consider that it was a design flaw, that meets the intent of transparency and understanding the rationale. The fact that you consider, Cyril, the fact that you consider that it could have been a design flaw. Maybe you messed up there. Maybe you didn't, and time will tell. But we iterate on success as we see success. So considering that to me is a mark of the sort of rationale that I want to see, to trust your intentions, to trust the DAO admin team, that you are taking into account different points of view in your decision making, and that you're not convinced of your own rightness. And I'm seeing evidence right here that you are thoughtful in your approach and you're considering different points of view, and that you could be wrong. And I think that's great. I think that's wisdom.
To finding that balance between efficiency and being, as democratic as possible, finding that right balance. The way these guys been selected, they're brilliant people. They're captain of industry, like Yat and Seb, obviously, Seb's being the founder of the Sandbox, Yat being the chairman of Animoca, makes sense. We've got Shannon Snow from World of Women. We've got Frédéric Montagnon, a very successful entrepreneur behind Ariani. We have Jean-Michel Paillon, that is an ex-executive at Ledger, and now is running his own, fund about, art and stuff. These are all brilliant people. And I think when you started an enterprise like a DAO, like you start an experiment, that's what I want to say. When you start like an experiment like a DAO, you want to be surrounded by as many smart people as you can, right? And these people were friendly of us. They wanted to help. They volunteered to help. We've gone through many interviews to make sure they were appropriately motivated and what they can bring to the table, etc., etc. So I get the disappointment and the comment that these guys are not necessarily from the community, but I would argue that they are still SandFam. They are still SandFam because we talk about them regularly and they care about.
I agree that they are SandFam. I don't think some people might dispute that, but I don't think most people would dispute that they are SandFam. Most of them own different things that have been part of SandFam for a long time, like World of Women, had their own experience, had their own avatars. Hard to argue that the person who helps run the operations is not SandFam at that point. I agree that they are SandFam. I also agree with the next part that he's about to caveat.
They care about the Sandbox, and they care about this DAO. So as long as they care about this DAO and Sandbox, they are SandFam, like any of us, right? So not because they're not tweeting every day doesn't mean that there's useless. I just want to.
I agree, and I acknowledge that point, Cyril. They don't have to be tweeting every day to be considered useful or a part of SandFam.
Drive that point home. They're very, very useful. And I got regular interaction with them, and I'm learning so much from these guys that are frankly brilliant. But I get the comment that they're not necessarily the closest to the game itself or, the community, or they don't necessarily show up on the Discord channel and interact directly with the community.
Yep. That's it. That's acknowledging the elephant in the room, that the special counsel and the advisory board, almost all of them, there are some that have shown up since, that have been on this podcast, and I've reached out to every single one of them except for one who I can't figure out how to contact. I can't find an email. I can't find a Twitter account. I can't find anything. But I've reached out to every single advisory board and special counsel member asking for an interview, and I've prepared the questions. I've watched almost every single one of them. I've watched at least 10 hours of interviews. There's a couple that I couldn't find anything on, except maybe a few interviews, like maybe 4 or 5 hours worth. But Sue, I think I've watched 20 hours of interviews. Seb, before I interviewed him, I think I watched 15 hours of interviews. I've dug deep to try and understand our special counsel and advisory board. And then I developed the questions to tailor to what is their involvement, what do they want to achieve before re-election. But I've only been able to interview one special counsel member and 2 advisory board members. So Mia Bao and Dr. Loretta Chen, I loved interviewing both of them. It's clear what their mission is. It's very clear, their contributions. And then I interviewed Seb, which needs no explanation of what his contribution is. We all know. But I wasn't able to and haven't been able to schedule an interview with other special counsel and advisory board members. Some of them have just declined. Some of them didn't give me a reason why they declined. They just said they couldn't. Others didn't respond. And others I exchanged a couple messages with, waiting on an answer of if they will agree to go on the podcast. So it's kind of a wide range of, I'm sorry, I'm not available. I'm sorry, I can't. And not answering me at all, or answering me to say, hey, I got your message, but not really answering if they will come on the podcast. And so that, it's been a little bit of frustration. I understand they're all captains of industry, but every single one of them agreed to this position. And every single one of these positions has a part to play in our DAO. So it is very important to us. And I can't help that they have full-time jobs. I can't help that. They accepted the position, and there's a responsibility there to help us through and lead in the position. So that's the part where I'm kind of struggling with. I don't want to poke and prod them too much on it. I've largely left it alone. I've reached out like I think twice per person, and if they didn't respond at all, then I've kind of resigned myself to the fact that they're not responding. I really, really want to interview each person and understand their perspective. Even if it's 30 minutes, I'd really love to interview every person. And I've reached out to all of them, and I have huge sections of notes talking about their perspective, their background, so that we're not rehashing stuff that they've done elsewhere. And we're really centered on Sandbox. What are they here to do in the DAO? How are they contributing? And what can we do as a family? How can we support them? Like it's a two-way street, not just a one-way, them serving us. So that's what I hope to get out of all of it. But if Bobby is able to do it instead, if Kunta is able to do it on his podcast, I consider it a win. Because to me, I can trust that Kunta is going to have the conversation, not confronting them, but talking to them like people, and them talking to us like they're our advisory board and special council members, not some outside publicity tour.
And I guess that's what our intent, to have a second body that is the advisory board. And these guys, they are much more closer to the game. They have studios, they publish games, they are much closer to the sandbox. And that was our idea, is to have the council is maybe this type of person, and the advisory board is people that are really maybe more connected deeply with the sandbox game itself, and balance these two bodies out will bring ultimately more value to the table.
And I wondered how that's going, how he believes that's going. That's the only thing he didn't expound on here, was the advisory board. I've interviewed 2 advisory board members, love them. They are great. And I don't feel like the advisory board is all that present in the discourse right now. I think I want to try and change that with a panel of some kind, but I haven't seen them much. I've seen Loretta Chen. I've seen Mia Bao. They've been tweeting and doing different things, involvement in the sandbox. I haven't seen the others as much. And I wonder about that. I wonder, are they supposed to be more involved? Because it sounds like what Cyril just said is that they should. But I reserve judgment on that. I'm trying to understand better. I'm trying to ask questions more before I make any judgment at all. Because maybe there's a really good reason for why we don't see panels of advisory board members talking about the sandbox. I mean, they're not being paid. They are paid 0 sand, whereas special counsel is paid 150,000 sand per year. So, yeah, with that comes some measure of their time. But as Cyril's about to point out, it's not quite like that. They're not paid to be public. It sounds like they're paid to give advice informally to Cyril so that he can improve the DAO. He's about to get into that.
That was our intent.
Yep, that all makes perfect sense. And another comment related to that is the conflict of interest comment. That Yat and Seb. I mean, it could be seen from either perspective. It's like flip sides of a coin. They're intimately connected and have a better understanding about the ecosystem, more unique and more like attached in many ways than most people in the world. But the other side is that it's a conflict of interest in making decisions towards decentralization. You know, so it's that pull that it's a healthy push and pull in both directions to decentralize and to hold hands, as you put it, up for a longer period of time. So
Yeah, but I would give kudos to them. Like, I
would
think
too.
the Sandbox DAO would never have happened if
I would give kudos to them as well.
it wasn't for Yat and Seb. First of all, Seb founded the Sandbox with his co-founder Arthur Madrid. So without these two persons, there wouldn't be no Sand, no Sandbox, and no DAO. So they want the DAO to succeed. Like they've teased about it 4 years ago in the white paper. There was always the intent to decentralize, and the whole question was when and how, right? And we made it happen. And so conflict of interest, I would say they want the DAO to succeed because they had no obligation to do a DAO, right? This is their company. They do whatever they want. And I think the fact that they've, asked the question, like, what can we do better? What can we do differently? How we can engage with the community in a different way? And actually makes a lot of sense with the Sandbox, like back to what I was saying at the beginning with the empowering creators and now empowering the communities and gradually transferring more and more power. It makes a lot of sense, but nobody asked them to do that, right? And Yat is obviously from Animoca, cares a lot about the success of the Sandbox as well. So they're just pushing for us to be.
Yat has outright said in a recent interview that Sandbox is a key strategic initiative of Animoca Brands. I have that here. Yep, there it is. His podcast with Camila Russo.
2019.
Camila Russo. So it's about 10 minutes in.
What you are, what products, what games you're building now?
Well, I mean, I think it's, obviously Sandbox continues to be a key strategic initiative, but otherwise,
That was only 3 months ago. So for Yatsu, Sandbox, it continues to be a key strategic initiative. So that's one of the things that Cyril is alluding to. And then the utter support that Seb has given and Arthur, both co-founders of the Sandbox, to make it a reality of what it is today.
Better, to be honest. And nobody asked them to, but they're here.
what can we say about the compensation? That is a concern for some people in the community.
I have a much different viewpoint on compensation being unfair. I don't think it's unfair at all, especially when you look at special counsels and other DAOs. Some of the other DAOs are being paid way more than 125,000 sand. And I meant to do that calculation for people to see. Like ApeCoin DAO is being paid 125,000 US dollars. So I'll do that conversion here while they're talking.
I think compensation is always questioned with regards to perceived value.
I completely agree with Cyril's viewpoint here on perceived value.
Everybody's like, oh, you're getting paid too much for this particular job versus I'm not being paid enough with regards to the value I'm bringing to the table, right? So it's always a matter of perceived value. The council is has a salary, but they bring a lot to the table as well. It's not perceived value. Like these people, they're not paid on the number of tweets they send. They're not like ambassadors or such. Like they paid by their thought process, the connections they bring to the table, the fact that they're thinking ahead. I mean, if these guys are so successful in their day-to-day lives and in their own personal endeavors, that's because they know stuff or they see stuff that nobody else sees. This has a lot of values. And I guarantee that the conversation I'm having with some of them are sometimes very lengthy and very deep, and they give us the time. They really take the time to be there for the DAO and really think about stuff and make introduction or help or whatever they can bring to the table. They're just not measured in the, interacting with the community or sending tweet or being present on the forum. That's not who they are. And that's frankly not why they've been chosen, but they bring a lot of value to the table. Then if you judge the number on pure absolute value, like look at other DAO and look at, for example, how much people were paid at the beginning of ApeCoin DAO. And you would see that they actually...
ApeCoin DAO, people were paid $20,000 a month. $20,000. It was later reduced down in a later AIP, I think a year ago, down to $9,000. So a little bit over 50% pay cut. But they were paid at ApeCoin DAO, right? Special counsel. And that was basically, the story goes is that the original special counsel was Starlade, like the co-founder of Reddit, the Yatsu Animoca brands. So star-studded just like ours is right now. And so it warranted a high salary. But then the elections started happening, the re-elections, and then community members started getting in. And so then community members who were not captains of industry in the same way that Yatsu is. Now we're being paid $20,000 a month, which is what? $240,000 a year, right? So the original was $250,000. So $250,000 in sand is 593,000 sand. All right, that's the conversion. So that's that was in 2022, I think. And then ApeCoin DAO Special Counsel in 2024 is now $125,000 per year. So what is that? 296,000 sand. So this is what he's talking about when he says that special counsels elsewhere are being paid much, much more than 125,000 sand. 125,000 sand is $52,000. That's fair. That's a fair amount. I'd say a good amount. Is it a livable wage? Some would argue not. Depending on what country you live in, it could be, for sure. But Sandbox is being paid $52,000 compared to ApeCoin DAO's $296,000 sand, which is $125,000. Right? So that's a big difference. It's a big difference. That's like ApeCoin DAO Special Counsel right now are being paid twice the amount that the Sandbox Special Counsel is. So there you go.
Really, the salary that have been presented here are fairly reasonable.
I agree.
And that's all I have to say about this. Really, it's always about what's your worth, and everybody can judge what somebody's worth, but actually, people are worth. I think definitely the money we're paying them.
I agree. You have some major key figures right now in the special counsel. I mean, one of them is chairman of the board of a company that owns 500 other companies, Animoca Brands. And we're paying him $50,000 to be on a board. That's where he's talking about perceived value.
I know. Well, more than enough said, in my opinion. Anybody that's got any more comments, questions, concerns, really about anything we're discussing, drop the comments on the video here, or you know where to find us elsewhere. We've got a few more topics to get through. Staking, let's expand on just what the staking concerns were that were raised in the poll and how they're being addressed. One of them is like not voting with sand that is staked, and just how that's behind the scenes now.
It was a conscious design decision not to include staking from the get-go.
I can understand the anger behind this one. It never really bothered me. I do stake sand, but it never really bothered me in the same way. Even though, my voting power is definitely going to be helped by that happening. But yeah, okay. I mean, there are bigger fish to fry than staking sand as voting power, but okay.
Alluded to that on one of the answers I've made on the forum. When you design a product, and you want to go with the lower hanging fruit first. You want to go with the quick win. Like, what's the cheapest, most effective, most impactful thing I can do first? Staking was not one of them. But I get the frustration because some of our community members had a lot of sand being stacked and they were hoping to get a better voting power, judging by the amount that I've staked. They were disappointed by this. I get it, 100%. And this is why now the team is studying, how to bring it back. I can tell you it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. This is something now it's time for us to look at and see how we can make it happen. But it wasn't the right time to do it at the beginning of this DAO. And it was really, like I said, a conscious decision. But we've listened to the community. And to be honest, this is also a tough one because we've listened, the community complained about, staking not being included. But there was also some people that said, why it should be included? I'm an American. I'm not allowed to use staking. Why I should
be, that's a fair point.
Doubly have twice the pain because now I can't even stake for myself and get rewards, and now I don't even get the voting power boost that everybody else is going to get. So that's a bummer. And these guys, they came to me when I was in NFC Lisbon, where we announced the DAO. I've stayed there for a couple of days and talked to as many people as I can. There was a lot of American people, I took the opportunity to raise that concerns, and that's the feedback I've got. Obviously, it was a few people, but it's direct feedback that people spontaneously gave me. So I had to take this into account as well, and that's why I confronted my decision that it was maybe not the right time, and we need to think more deeply about staking, whether it's a good or bad idea. And now looking back at this, and now that the DAO is, more up and running and then standing on its two legs and stuff, we do have a little bit more time to look after this and really ask ourselves, whether stacking is a good idea. And we believe it is, but now let's make it happen. And it's not that easy, but we're working towards making it happen together with the Sandbox, to be honest. And the admin team is not the only one equipped to deal with this. And the Sandbox is helping us understanding, how the current staking protocol works at the Sandbox and how to make it work and, include it into our voting power.
Yeah, excellent. These are really such important conversations.
Yeah, I had no comments here. I agree. Understood. Makes sense. Acknowledged.
On just building that trust. So, man, everything here deserves the time that it's got to get. We've got a few bullet points to get through here that I don't think we're just going to have the time to get through. And I don't want everybody out there listening to feel like this is rushed. So why don't you and I just meet, and we're going to have to tackle some of these in the weeks ahead and, dive a little deeper into them, how the DAO is operating. I can address them some pretty quick here too. I mean, DAO operating in a gray area landscape. Gosh, I mean, there's so much to unpack in just, that sentiment that was shared in the poll, but we've got to talk more about that. We have already kind of embedded in the other topics, the language barrier. The website is currently in 7 languages. This poll, like we looked at before, we've got to figure out a little bit more what some of those Asian languages are that we can reach new community members with. So if you're listening to this and there is a language barrier, I mean, just tell us your native country, what language you speak, how we can be translating more of the material we're putting out. Because, the goal is to get even these podcasts, we can have the transcripts at least, if not the captions and the languages that are most important for our community. And if there's other languages that need the translation, maybe we can even get somebody translating it. I bet you there. I just thought this on the whim, but I bet you there's an AI tool that does this sign language, has an AI sign language bot that we can put onto videos too.
There is.
Accessibility is a really important topic for universally, so it has to be important here. So low participation is the next bullet here. I mean, that's anybody who's listening to this. That's part of your responsibility too, not just ours. Is to get more people participating, right? So whether
I agree with Kunta on this.
So that means delegating your voting power, getting more people who hold sand and land.
That's what I was talking about earlier, where I want to tackle that problem. I want to be that in the podcast. I want to encourage that sort of inner dialogue within the SandFam community itself, whereas Kunta can only take that so far as being the communications manager for the DAO admin team. His role is to ensure that the DAO admin team is communicating and do what he can to facilitate communication. But it's not really his role, and I would not expect him to make that the focus of his job. I would expect that of me as a community member and others as community members.
To get active, whatever it is, let's all do it. We're in this together. Everybody just wants money is the bottom bullet point. I mean,
sure, true, but also, I mean, that's everywhere. I think
we're both laughing because everybody wants money, and I agree. It's just balancing that and striking the right balance between needs and greeds and building a community that we can all work with. So we're going to talk about that too in the future here. So we got a few questions from the community.
I agree.
We can just hit them really quick here. What benefit does this DAO? I'll get by going to a SIP invite only system. Cyril, you had a quick response to that.
I can't tell, but this might have been one of my questions, because I also responded in the poll. Sounds like it might have been. I'm not sure. Maybe.
I think it would back to what we discussed about the SIP process itself. SIP invite only. Like I said, curation takes community resources, and by community resources, I mean people from the admin team being allocated into curating a particular SIP. That takes money and time. So not everything deserves to be curated, unfortunately, and that's why we have this little filter where only the stuff that we judge as human being, right? Not robot, not machine, not algorithm, as human being. Also looking at community reactions and how people like the idea or not. This is how idea gets picked up to start the SIP curation process, and that's why for now it's still by invite only.
I like that he said for now. That to me assuaged my fear, my resentment that I had, because I had many more SIPs. Like I have 18 different SIPs that I have planned out with my team in MetaWorlds. Different stuff, different problems we want to tackle, different things that we've seen over the years, for all different points of view. And it saddens me to think that I have to wait an unknown amount of time to be invited to give a SIP. Now, Kunta's about to say something about the semantics of it. I do not agree with him on this one, because anyone could always put something out on the ideas forum. Like I said, I put out 10 already in the ideas subforum. You could always do that, but you could always, up until the new the new process, you could always submit your SIP to the team, the DAO admin team, to undergo the voting process, to get reviewed and then go to the council and then go to voting. This new process, as of October 2024, removes that openness and is now invite only. You cannot submit a SIP to the DAO admin team without them inviting you to. Submit it to the forums as a SIP idea. You could always do that. That was always the case. Now it's mandatory you do it, and you can't proceed past that until you're invited.
Yeah, I mean, that's also kind of semantics that might be a bit inaccurate. It's not really invite only. Anybody can propose a SIP. It's just that only some are then selected for curation.
That to me is the semantics. Anyone can propose a SIP, but not all of you are going to get there. Not all of you are going to be considered. That was different. That's the change from May of 2024 SIP process to October 2024 SIP process, from a open system to a invites only system. So invite only semantics, okay, maybe, but it's not untrue to say that you cannot proceed through that process in October 2024 in the same open way that you could back in May. It's different, but I like that Cyril said it's different for now. That gives me hope, and it gives me the assurance that they're looking at this to see if it's going to work or not. Does this improve on the goals that they're trying to reach for the Sandbox DAO? Okay, no, I get that. I really, really hope it really is for now, but maybe in the end I won't have a problem with it. It's this way for now.
Be advanced
Yep.
further. So, it might not be how other DAOs are doing it, but hopefully people can, appreciate the opportunity that's in front of us all.
And I do. Now, I think you and I agree on that. I can appreciate the opportunity.
The other
Yep.
one, is it possible for SandFam to listen in on advisory board and special council meetings if and when they're held? I think the simple answer.
This one might have been my question too. Again, I can't tell. I don't remember if I asked that specific question. I have asked that before elsewhere. So maybe this isn't just a question that he's drawing from the poll, because I have asked that in the forums before, and I don't think I got a response. I think it was part of the DAO Medium article thread that I posted and did a podcast episode too. These two questions, though, I'm very interested in answers. SandFam to listen in on advisory board and special council meetings if and when they are held. So something that I'm no longer quite as adamant about it right now, because I understand what Cyril's saying about the advisory board and special council, how he's doing these informal one-on-ones, and they're being paid to really give that informal kind of aside. And there's discretion there. There's discretion about that advice. However, in the future, when community members start becoming special council members, I will push for open meetings. I think that will be important. But as of right now, based on what Cyril has revealed, okay, I think it can make sense. I just think that I'll reserve to the very end till they're done talking about it.
There is really just no, because they're not timed. They're trying to find the 5 or 10 minutes that people have when they're on the go here.
And that makes sense. That makes sense. They're on the go. They're discrete topics sometimes, like sensitivity. It requires a little bit of where people need to feel open to talk. Whereas in a recorded session, maybe they won't. Okay, makes sense. And they're not being paid to necessarily be the most out in front person of the DAO, like I thought, and like the rest of the community thought they were. We definitely thought that that's what they were being paid to do.
We're there to connect over some discrete topics, and so just no is the quick.
No is the short answer, and I would add to that we don't have a board, right? These are not board meetings because the DAO is not a company, and having board meeting implies having leadership that is eventually accountable, and that's not the case in this DAO.
I don't know what Cyril means by that, because as I learned that the DAO Foundation is a company, it's a foundation company in the Cayman Islands. It does have board meetings, so I'm confused about what he means here, and so I'd like to ask, because earlier in this he does mention that the DAO has a legal wrapper. So I'm wondering what the difference is. I don't think I fully understand this.
So there's no formal meeting that the community could listen to. Like I said, these are more informal conversation about future of the DAO, Web3 news, what can we do better, what these guys have learned, and sometimes questions about the SIP itself. But no like actual board meeting happening at the DAO.
Yep, there you go. So quick answer is just kind of no. Will Sandbox have gift cards sold at box retail stores to load sand into accounts? I thought that was an awesome question. Like we're thinking like big game style. And I mean the answer there is hopefully like one day let's all just keep building here. That's certainly not next week though.
Yeah.
All right, so look, I mean, it's to be continued, kind of like any good cliffhanger, not even in just one episode. This is like a to be continued, like in perpetuity, because we're going to keep building with you. So that's it. I mean, it's basically a wrap for episode 1. Thank you so much for joining us, Cyril. This is awesome.
Pleasure.
Look forward to having you back, having more of that special counsel and advisory board that we talked about, other stakeholders, even community members up here and joining on the conversation. So if we didn't address a topic that you want to hear more about, that forum that's fielding questions that we only got those last 3 from, that will remain open. I'll share that link here on the screen. A few of the most important topics that I'm going to address in the next few months are, repairing these relationships with the community that still want to be involved, providing as much transparency as we can to what we're doing, how we're doing it and why, working as closely as possible with community members who want to help with what we see as one of the most important challenges facing the DAO, which is attracting new participants so we can reach quorum and just keep building here. So bring your friends, let's do this, keep doing it, subscribe to YouTube, drop some comments, share this with a friend, follow the X account, engage it, share some of our posts, and that's it. Enjoy Alpha Season 4. Stay in touch with us. Any final thoughts? You got a few seconds, Cyril.
Keep playing the Sandbox.
That's it. Love y'all, SandFam. Happy Kunta.
Cheers.
Peace.
Ciao, guys.
We've been going for 3 hours, so I'm not going to do the normal out and about, but my only thoughts left were bravo. Bravo. This was the episode I needed to hear. For my mistrust, my resentment, to get past my anger, all the fear about who's running the DAO and do they have our best intentions at heart. This was the episode I needed to hear for that. So I consider it behind me now. I'm looking forward to what we're building together. SandFam, DAO, Admin Team, Sandbox Team, and I now feel more comfortable bringing in outside business interests to help support my SIPs, to make them successful. And I feel way more certain and confident about those business relationships, the things that are going to be necessary for some of these SIPs to succeed, at least for me. And that's a powerful thing, because some of these business relationships are very powerful and they're important. They bring experts to the table, which would not be available to us in Web3 had we not made these disclosures. And I can disclose to them now what sort of the intent is behind some of this stuff. And so they don't really feel like they're under the gun of regulation, or like they're just waiting for an axe to fall on them because they're involved now in Web3 and they have to for their business development or whatever. We can now assuage those fears and help onboard them at a much faster pace and with more confidence that their risk is being mitigated appropriately. I'm talking very program manager like, talking very entrepreneurial and business like, but that's what goes down here. And when you have a DAO that where the business, the gaming, the community, and leadership all intersect together. If you want to be playing in that sort of field as a DAO, you've got to come at it in a way that can facilitate others' contributions. So I'm looking forward to it. I think this is the right move. Thank you for doing this, Cyril and Kunta, and I look forward to the many others. So that'll do it for today. Today's podcast was a reaction video to SandDAO Podcast Official Episode 1 with Cyril and Kunta, focusing on the transparency piece that alleviated much of my concerns, my fear, my anger, my resentment that had been building since May 28th when the DAO was announced, and we didn't get the reaction, the explanation, the rationale, and the transparency that we were expecting. This turned that around, and I no longer feel the same way I did before listening to it. Thank you, Kunta and Cyril. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, for being open. And I really encourage you to keep doing that. And I think it will pay dividends back to the DAO. All right, SandFam,